IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Thursday, December 12th. We are now 8 days away, Trevor, from Notre Dame kicking off the 2024 college football playoff. They will host the Indiana Hoosiers, and we are going to have so much to say about this breakdown next week, Trev. A whole lot to say, but today, as we said, is still going to be focused on Notre Dame. And on Tuesday, we talked about the Notre Dame offense. Yesterday, we talked about the special teams. We did some breakout players. We had a super fun Bicel hold yesterday. Trev and I were talking about that after the show. That was you guys did such a great job with your submissions yesterday. So many thoughtful submissions because, there's several we had to kind of think about, And that's it's a good submission when we have to kind of pause and think about it, or we have to say sell, but we really like the way the thing was brought on. It was really, really well done. We're back for more action today, and today we're going to talk about the Notre Dame defense. Again, with the focus being on not Indiana, but looking at the playoff as a whole. Where is Notre Dame's defense right now? We'll kind of go through a look back through the season. It's been a very trying season for the Notre Dame defense, which just says a lot about just how good they are. But, how they got here. What are the strengths of this defense? What are the areas of concern? What are the things they need to really do well in the playoff to have success? What are the things that they need to improve upon to have success? And then we'll do our three keys. And Trev and I were having a lot of conversation about that, what those three keys are. And so we came down to three that we really like. And then, of course, we'll kind of wrap things up there. Going to be a fun day, Trev. I'm excited about this show. You had Notre Dame UConn ladies on tonight at 7. That's going to be a great game. Can't wait for that. That's why there will be I don't know if there will be an IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. I don't know if Sean or if Vince and those guys are going to cover that. But Stires will be doing the play-by-play. So if you're not able to watch the game, you can listen to it. You can listen to our Sean Stires doing the play-by-play of that game. So going to be a lot of fun. But we're going to have a little bit of a special guest here, Trev, coming on that we're gonna have a little conversation with somebody first before we kind of get rocking and rolling. But I'm waiting on him to show up that I haven't given you a heads up on. Yeah. So let's kick things off, Trev. You know what to do, right? You know where to go with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Pumped for the special guest. I love surprises, but what's not surprising, my friends, is our friends over at MyBookie. We got to talk about them. They've been ripping off some great things this year. And if you're unfamiliar with where we're at and you want to sign up, MyBookie is a sports book similar to the DraftKings and the FanDuels of the world. But our friends over at MyBookie have some killer promotions going on right now. One of them being is if you sign up and use promo code IRISH, IRISH, what that's going to do for you is it's going to double your deposit bonus. So that means if you put in $15, MyBookie is going to match your $15 and give you an additional $15 to bet with. So we've talked about it a lot. MyBookie risk-free Thursdays. You can take advantage of that tonight. Tonight, the Rams take on the 49ers in a divisional matchup in the NFL. So make sure that you take advantage of that. All the risk-free means is if your bet hits, you cash out in a big way. If for whatever reason you don't hit, then you get your money back. Thus, risk-free. You can find that under the Bets Boost tab. Now, if you are a little bit burnt out on sports betting, sometimes I know I get there too, be sure to check out the live casino. So if you're somebody that likes to go to the casino, we've talked about it before, it intimidates me a little bit. So maybe I need to take some baby steps and start out by trying it out on my phone, chilling on my couch, playing some blackjack. So make sure that you go and you check out MyBookie's live casino. When you enroll, be sure to enroll in their loyalty rewards program. You're going to earn extra cash just for placing down some bets. So be sure to check out our friends over at MyBookie. You can bet anything, anywhere, anytime with our friends over there. Check them out.
So, Trevor, before we get started today, I have a little special treat for you, and I have a little special treat for the rest of the audience. So, you see a lot of the takes on Notre Dame, and they kind of range in a lot of different views. And there's a lot of people I'm just like, I'm not listening to that guy. I'm not listening to that guy. But one person whose opinion I really like and respect is this guy. I don't know if some of you might have heard him, named Bill Trocchi. Kind of hosts a show here at CFB Nation. And Bill put out his predictions for the college football playoff. He put his name on it, Trev, right? He didn't just talk about it. He put his name on it. And we're going to be joined by our guy, Bill Trocchi, and he's going to tell us who he picked to win the national championship this year and why. So, Bill, thanks for joining us here at Irish Breakdown, my friend.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy working with you guys and working with the CFB Nation podcast, All America podcast. Very fun with Bill Bender. And I mean, it's the third year of a coach at Notre Dame. He's a good coach.
Kind of a pattern, right?
Could have filled it in August, Brian. Could have filled it in August.
There you go. Well, Bill, it's kind of funny. You and I have done a lot of shows together. We've talked. We've known each other for years. It's interesting. The Saturday of the Georgia Tech game was the first time that we had met in person because you were at that game. You got a chance to see Notre Dame up close and personal against the Georgia Tech team that I know you're familiar with, and covering the different aspects of that. And so the playoff is released. You get the bracketology. First, just kind of talk us through just kind of how you approached going into this kind of prediction, because you went through each round and made your picks, and there's some interesting ones. There's not a lot different from mine, to be honest with you, Bill. I haven't shared what mine is, but just kind of talk about just your process first, and then we're going to get into we're going to go round by round. We're going to tease y'all a little bit.
Okay.
We're going to go round by round and give Bill's picks.
Yeah. So we at sportingnews.com, Selection Sunday was a very big day. We had a lot of different things we had to get done, but one thing we wanted to do is Bill Bender and I both wanted to fill out a bracket, sort of similar to the expert brackets we do for the basketball March Madness Selection Sunday. Those are always very popular. Try to get them out as quick as you can. It was hard to do any work in advance because there was no telling what the seeds were going to be and what the matchups were going to be. So once I cleared the decks a little bit, I have some more editorial stuff than Bender does. So I actually saw Bender's picks before my picks, and then had to send his off to creative to get the design people to do his bracket, whatever. And I looked at him, and next time you see Bill Bender, call him Chalk Bender, if you would, because in all 11 games, he picked the higher ranked team to beat the lower ranked team.
So lazy.
So I said to myself, not seeded, ranked. He did pick the rank. So even though he's got, Penn State going on as a 6 seed or whatever, or 5 seed, whatever, it was just like, no, Bender, you're just picking the ranked over the higher ranked team. But anyway, so I was like, I got to think of a way to go about more of a dark horse. I think Oregon is a worthy favorite. There's no question about it. Only undefeated team, obviously. Quarterback that has played big in big games, even before he got to Oregon. Their defense is very good. They got a lot of good players on it. It would take an upset to beat Oregon. They are, like I said, a worthy favorite. I come back a little bit to going, 16-0 is not easy, especially when those 4 games, the last 4 games, will be in Indianapolis, Los Angeles, Dallas, and Atlanta, none of which are anywhere near Eugene.
Unless they're playing in Seattle, there isn't a whole lot close to Eugene.
There's not a lot close to Eugene. That's a lot of, and you look at the last road trip they did, I think it was against Wisconsin, they looked a little burned. They had to struggle with a 5-7 team. And I think travel may have had a little bit to do with it. And travel is not even close to over for those guys. But like I said, they're awesome. They're great. They're a worthy number one. It would take an upset to beat them. But I started looking at the dark horses, right, in the bracket and other teams that could win it. And I was like, well, Georgia, they've got quarterback concerns. Penn State, James Franklin does not have a great history as far as beating top 5 teams, top 10 teams. Everybody knows those numbers. I looked at Ohio State. They got a heck of a road ahead of them with Tennessee and Oregon right off the bat. That's not easy. And so then I looked at Texas, and I'm like, well, they haven't really beaten a good team this year. Quinn Ewers does not look like the early season Quinn Ewers to me right now. And then I got to Notre Dame, and I could make a case for their path through the bracket. They're on a nice winning streak. Hasn't been against the best competition, but I was looking for a little bit of a dark horse. I picked them to upset Oregon in the championship game.
Oh, you gave it away too soon. I was gonna walk everybody through this. So let's kind of go through your bracket, Bill. You have Texas, so we'll just kind of give just quickly the couple of the ones that people. You already said Notre Dame, so you have Notre Dame beating Indiana. Penn State, you have beating SMU, and then Texas beating Clemson. You do have one upset in the first round, Bill. You have Ohio State or Tennessee beating Ohio State. So let's talk about that. What did you see from the Volunteers that has you picking that up?
I feel like Tennessee.
By the way, Trev kind of agrees with you. He's thinking that's the most likely upset game in the first round, is what.
As it should be with an 8-9 game, I guess. You
Right.
know, although the seeding is so jacked, but the 8-9 game, you should have a decent chance at an upset. I think obviously the mindset around Columbus right now is not great. Ryan Day is under serious pressure. How has he performed under serious pressure in recent years? Not great. But to me, Tennessee is built a little bit like Michigan. And Michigan obviously gave them a lot of trouble. They have a very good defensive line. It's not going to be easy for Ohio State to run on them. It's presumably going to be cold and gross. And so the advantage they have at wide receiver, they might not be able to exploit as much. Tennessee has a better quarterback situation than Michigan does, obviously. So I started to think about that. That's what it struck me, is that Tennessee might be, they're not quite as dominant on defense as Michigan, but they do have a good defensive line, which gave the Ohio State O-line so much trouble when they tried to run the ball between the tackles all day. And so that was my upset, is a little bit of the mindset going on with Ohio State, the uncomfortable situation after losing to Michigan again, and then how Tennessee is put together.
Yeah. It's interesting too, Bill, just briefly. Ohio State the last couple of years has not looked really good out of conference either the last couple of years offensively. Outside of maybe you could say like the Georgia game, right,
Sure.
2 years ago, but like they didn't play well offensively against Notre Dame in 2022. They didn't play well against Notre Dame last year. They got embarrassed by Missouri last year. So it is interesting to see how they're going to perform in this game. I also think it's ironic that Ohio State is the one Northern team that probably benefits when they have to go play South in the winter, because the way they've constructed this team, it's about speed and finesse and passing the football, which, you know, anyone that grew up and Trev grew up in Indiana, I grew up in Ohio, Bill, I know you spent some time up north in this time of the year. That's not exactly conducive to northern weather in November and September, or November and December. So I do find that kind of interesting, fascinating. So we get to round two.
Yeah,
Bill.
well, one point on that too is I was thinking about when I was watching the Boise State UNLV game. I think college players are going to have a harder time adapting to the cold, gross December weather than NFL players do. And we're going to see some sloppier first-round games with these three northern sites than maybe we expect and maybe we're used to. And if you remember way back when this thing was kind of announced, I think it was Gene Smith, who was the athletic director at Ohio State, talked about maybe moving these games indoors. It was going to be up to the teams. They could move it to the Indianapolis, the Colts indoor facility, or Detroit indoor facility. That quickly got squashed because I think people were just really excited to have on-campus games. But I think the reason why he planted that seed was just like what you're talking about, is Ohio State on the fast track, the way they're built, is better to play indoors.
Yeah. Whereas Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, they're like, bring it up here in the outdoor stadium, because that's right in their wheelhouse of how they play football. So let's go to round two, Bill. You have, obviously, you said you had Oregon and Notre Dame in the championship game. So obviously you have Oregon beating Tennessee. You have Notre Dame beating Georgia. I'll get to that in a second. Penn State, you have beating Boise State. You have what I believe is going to be considered an upset, although it's a higher seed. Or a lower seed, higher seed winning, but I think we all anticipate that Texas will be favored to beat Arizona State. You have the Sun Devils pulling off the upset. What did you see?
I do. I think it's just the nature of the beast. I think there's going to be an upset or two in here. I had to find one. I've liked Texas. Their defense is great. Obviously, they got a great corner. He's first team All-America. Hint, hint. I mean, spoiler alert, we just did our All-Americans today. But you know, the way Arizona State's going, it cracks me up. They're just like Kenny Dillingham, and when Scatterbo threw that pass and just like avoided the you know, I thought he was going to have a meltdown on the sideline, but which is not his first meltdown. You know, I don't have a ton of I'm just riding the wave of these Sun Devils. Like, I picked Iowa State and then they just absolutely trounced them. You know, I was like, Dillingham, he's like, doesn't have experience and he's big. It doesn't seem to matter. They're up rolling right now. Maybe they get the jump on Texas early with a turnover 2 or whatever. It's in the Peach Bowl here in Atlanta, and so that's where Texas got beat by Georgia. So yeah, I mean, on paper, I'd say Texas. I'm just going with the underdog here.
They're playing like that team where you want to be like, you guys know you're not supposed to be here, right? You know what I mean? Like, you guys know who you are, right? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. What do we got to lose? No one thinks we can do anything, so we're just out here having fun playing our game. That's absolutely how they're playing right now, Bill. The other games, obviously, you picked Notre Dame to beat Georgia. That's obviously a big one. Let's chat about that. Why do you? Is it just simply about the quarterback being out, or are there other things that you see?
A little bit. I think another thing is Georgia dominated the line of scrimmage a little bit against Texas, but that has not been the way they've played most of the year. Their rushing defense is not up to the normal Kirby Smart standards of the last few years. And of course, Notre Dame's going to try to run the ball first. They're a run first team. They've got 2 great running backs. They've got a quarterback that's extremely elusive. And so, which Georgia defensive line, which Georgia front 7 shows up in that game. Notre Dame's able to run the ball and control the clock a little bit. And now Gunnar Stockton is playing from behind, and he is trying to, get the Bulldogs out of a hole a little bit. I mean, he did a great job in that first drive against Texas. Rest of the game, they did not do great things. He'd had a nice scramble in overtime. Of course, he got knocked out of the game with the the helmet came off and all that. He is more of a runner than Carson Beck. I don't think he's an elite runner, though. I mean, I've only saw him for a half, so it's hard to totally judge. But he's not in Riley Leonard's class or something like that.
He's a power runner, Bill. He had over 4,000 yards rushing in high school. He's that kind of like that bulldozer type. Our comparison we said on our show is he's the one Power 5 quarterback I could see transfer to Army and do what Bryson Daly's doing. You know what I mean? Like similar style of just he's a fullback playing quarterback. As he's a much better thrower than Bryson Daly. But I mean, as a runner, that's what he did in high school. It's that downhill, he can pull it and run. He's not going to, he's not Riley Leonard. He's not Jalen Milroe, but he's a guy that on 3rd and 1, you're going to be running power read, and he's going to be hammering his old 6'1", squatty, 220-pound booty up in there and converting the chains and making big plays that way. And
right.
As you saw in that game, he's not afraid to take a hit.
No, he's not afraid to take a hit. He's not like the SMU quarterback who's going to be elusive and
right,
and
exactly.
Get down and make a
boom, boom,
right,
boom,
right. So I don't know. I mean, Notre Dame's defense is pretty good. I think we were all in agreement there. So playing a guy who doesn't have a ton of experience, you saw that inexperience on that interception he threw under pressure. He basically the end zone camera he had 2 guys on a cross wide open.
Yeah.
And then he tried to throw it out of bounds and couldn't get it there. So that was just a panic situation. That's fine, whatever. He hasn't played very much and they did get on him quick. But I think Notre Dame can get on him quick too. And so yeah, I think and especially if it's Stockton, if Jeremiah Love is healthy and Notre Dame goes into that game on a little bit of a roll, I think that the point spread is going to be very close, a lot closer than a normal maybe Georgia and Notre Dame game might be.
Yeah, I saw the early line is Notre Dame -2 is the early Vegas lines I've seen 2.5 where Notre Dame's the favorite, which I think
that's quite early.
Yeah, very.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is in large part due to obviously Carson Beck likely being out, but still it's not going to be like where it's +10 and then goes to -2 because of Carson Beck, right? I mean, I don't think it's going to be that. So next round, Bill, you already have we know you have Oregon in the championship game, an old Pac-12 rematch. I thought that was pretty awesome to see a Pac-12 rematch in the semifinals, and it just makes you, hey, Larry Scott, you did this, right? This could have been you, but you did this. But you have Notre Dame and Penn State, a game that we have not seen played since 2007. Bill, last time Notre Dame and Penn State played each other. You have them squaring off against each other in the semifinals. You have the Irish winning that game.
It's going to be hard to see a Notre Dame Penn State game. You have visions of Reggie Brooks catching the ball in the snow, and now they're competing in Miami. What that's not going to be. That doesn't feel like Notre Dame Penn State to me. But yeah, again, I think it's the running game and it's the defense and it's James Franklin's sort of inability to get it done on the biggest stage. Now, they're going to have some momentum if they obviously get this far with a couple of wins. But, I feel like, Riley Leonard he's making strides in the passing game. He was a better passer in the second half of the season than he was in the first half of the season. He's getting more accurate. The Notre Dame offensive line has been playing better. We'll see. It's an upgrade in competition, but I feel like this team is more put together than the Penn State team, and I think James Franklin gets tight in these games. We've seen that. He would be tight in this one. His gambles paid off. He did a great job in the fourth quarter. Hats off to him in the Big Ten championship game. I mean, that fake punt was terrific. They executed it well and, put the game out of reach, really. I mean, so I like how Penn State has been playing, but to me, it's just this Notre Dame team is just on such a roll right now. It's hard to pick against them.
And James Franklin's not going to go from never winning any big games to like 3 in a row, right? I mean, I just don't see how that happens, right? I mean, I just don't see it. But that Oregon game, I said this, that was one of the most impressive Penn State games they've played in years, and it was a loss. I mean, I give them a lot of credit. They could have easily just kind of rolled over and died after falling behind 28-10, and they didn't. But I kind of felt like that's when James Franklin's in his wheelhouse, when there's no pressure. Hey, we're down 28-10. I got nothing to lose. I can not coach tight now because we're down big, and that's kind of what happened. And then, of course,
that fake punt I referred to. That fake punt I referred to was the Minnesota game when they was trying to run out the clock against Minnesota. Obviously the Big Ten championship game. You're right. I mean, it was 2 scores, 1 score, 2 scores, 1 score, and it felt on the verge, and they never let it get out of reach.
Right. You got to give him credit for that. I mean, they competed, but that's the biggest stage he's been on all year, and we're giving him credit for not getting blown out. Right. I mean, like same thing with, hey, give you a lot of credit. That's the stuff that Brian Kelly used to, require praise for. Well, hey, we didn't lose to Alabama as much as Ohio State did, and we didn't lose to Clemson as much as Alabama did. You know what I mean? Like that's when you're not a big game guy, when you start talking about that nonsense. But so championship game, Bill, we have the number 1 overall and number 1 seeded Oregon Ducks against the number 7 seeded but number 5 ranked, which is so confusing, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. You have the good guys, or excuse me, you have Notre Dame winning it all.
Hey,
let's talk about why.
Paul Meyerberg, USA Today Sports, also has Notre Dame winning the national championship.
My man.
So, I listened to his podcast on yesterday, the Football Fix with Dan Wolken, and he likes the Irish. Dan was surprised by that pick, but same thing that he was kind of saying that I was saying. I mean, Oregon's scary. Tez Johnson is an awesome wide receiver, right? Mm-hmm. Evan Stewart was great against Ohio State the first time around. He was a dominating guy. They've got 3 of their guys, I think, on the defensive line are either first or second team All Big Ten. It's not just Uwe Ungalale. They got 2 more guys.
Birch, who Notre Dame has actually faced. They faced him a couple years ago at South Carolina. Really good football player. Mm-hmm. Really good football player.
So, there's work to be done, but like I said, I think that the challenge is trying to go 16-0, trying to do it so many long road trips. It's going to be a grueling tournament for sure. And, I like the amount of turnovers that Notre Dame has forced this year. I think they're first in the country, or first or second.
Tied for first, but they've played 1 fewer game than Texas, who's tied with them.
Okay. So, So, you get Oregon in a hole, you get the running game going, and who knows what happens. Maybe Gabriel starts forcing it a little bit. Maybe he does turn the ball over, and Notre Dame pulls off the upset. So, I mean, if I was Vegas, I'd say, Oregon might be an 8 or 9 point favorite, maybe. But we've seen bigger upsets this year. I think Northern Illinois got Notre Dame, maybe. I can't remember.
Yeah,
there was some sort of upset.
Notre Dame was A&M was also favored against Notre Dame.
There you go.
This is an argument I was having with a Georgia guy a couple weeks ago. He was trying to say that the reason Georgia should have been ranked ahead of Notre Dame. This is before they even played. After the Georgia Tech game, before they played Texas. And I was like, well, they'd be favored to win by 10. And I'm like, weren't they favored to beat, Oklahoma or Georgia? I mean, Alabama, weren't they favored to beat Georgia Tech by 18? Weren't they favored to beat Ole Miss? Wasn't Texas favored to beat them the first time they played? You know what I mean? Like, that's irrelevant. Wasn't Alabama favored to kill Vanderbilt and whoop Oklahoma, right? Like, this stuff is irrelevant. It's especially in a year like this, Bill, where there is no, we've said this all year, there is no 2018 Clemson. There is no 2019 LSU. There is no 2020 Bama. There's not even a 2021 or 2020 Georgia team in college football this year, which makes this to where I think there's 5, maybe 6 teams that have a chance to win it all, in my opinion. And Notre Dame's one of them.
Yeah, those teams that you mentioned, that's what it would take to go 16-0, I think,
right.
in this setup and all the upsets we've seen this year and everything like that. And I agree with you. I think I might have put that in my column, that there isn't a 19 LSU or a 20 Alabama. And it's going to be a challenge. So, like I said, Oregon's a worthy number 1, obviously. Avoided the chaos. That was Bender's expression he used all year, talking about Oregon. They avoided the chaos, and nobody else did.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know that they have the juice to go all the way. Now, on the flip side, how many are we asking Notre Dame to win in a row, right?
Right. That would be
15.
They'd be 14 in a row. Yeah, 14 in a row.
I mean, that's not an easy task either.
Right.
But I had to go dark horse after Bender went chalk all the way.
I know, right? I'm gonna text him here in a minute and be like, look, man, you went soft on me. You know what I mean? Like, you went soft on me a little bit. But I just feel like the way this season has gone, Bill, I would just find it really shocking if it's just a status quo, highest ranked teams win. There's nothing about this season that makes us think that's how the postseason is going to go, right? Like, I'm starting thinking, like, Clemson doesn't have a shot to beat Texas. Like, the only reason they're even in here is because of this and that, and they're not that good. And then but that's exactly why I'd be nervous about that game if I'm a Texas fan, right? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, there's no way that Boise State's going to win a postseason. But that's the same reason why I'm like, I don't know if I'd want to, write them off, because some of these teams are like, dude, we got nothing to lose right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like Arizona State, Clemson, SMU, Boise State, Indiana. Those teams have no one expects anything of them, which makes them dangerous because they can just kind of go out and play.
Right.
And that's what I think is going to make for a really, really fun postseason. As long as the team you root for isn't knocked out in the first round, then you may not find it to be a very fun postseason. But I think it's going to be so. There's no doubt about it. So.
Now, I'm sure you've broken down Indiana, Notre Dame already. The one, my thoughts on it was it's going to look a little bit like Indiana, Ohio State, and if Notre Dame's front seven can dominate, that's the goal, is to have Notre Dame's front seven dominate like Ohio State's front seven. Do you see it that way too? Absolutely.
They can't let Curtis Rourke sit in the pocket. I mean, he's an experienced kid. He was very good at Ohio when he was healthy. They don't have elite receivers. This is not the best receiving core Notre Dame has faced this year. Louisville and USC both have better. I think you could argue Georgia Tech's is comparable, and Georgia found that out. But just they play so well as a team, Bill. I mean, we talked about this. I said this is my way of explaining what makes them good. They have a bunch. It's like a G5 All-Star team that plays with a G5 chip on their shoulder, right? These are the best of that level that have come to this level. They're not future first-round draft picks.
From the coach on down.
Right, exactly. And they play with that G5 chip on their shoulder. And then, of course, Cignetti spent some time at Alabama under Nick Saban, so it's not like he hasn't been around this type of environment before, but they're going to play like they got nothing to lose. And they played like they had nothing to lose against Ohio State. I mean, when it took that first drive right down the field and scored, it's just at some point in time when the other team definitely has better athletes than you and can beat you in the trenches, that's when they got in trouble. And that's what happened after the first quarter and a half against Michigan. They jumped on Michigan early, and then all of a sudden Michigan started kind of beating them up in the trenches, and that's what allowed Michigan to get back in that game. Unfortunately, Michigan doesn't have the athletes on the perimeter. Well, unfortunately for Michigan, they don't have the athletes on the perimeter to have hurt them the way that Ohio State could defensively and offensively. And that's the recipe for a team like that, especially on your home field, is you've got to overwhelm that kid. You can't let him get comfortable. You can't let him get to a rhythm. And that's why I explained yesterday, I think Indiana's a better team than SMU in several ways. But if you're asking me which one I'd rather face Indiana, because the mobile quarterback is the guy that makes you concerned. And we saw that against USC. Notre Dame had 3 or 4 sack opportunities against Jaden Mayava that they couldn't bring him down. Well, Curtis Rourke is going down in those situations. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, is like those those pocket quarterbacks are not the guys that have given Notre Dame problems the last few years. It's Caleb Williams in 2022, right? It's it's guys like that have given Notre Dame those issues that Notre Dame defense issues. And this is a defense that's faced C.J. Stroud, Drake May, Caleb Williams, some big time quarterbacks, and they've really kept them all in check, with the exception of the occasional game where a guy just runs around and makes a lot of plays. And so I have a hard time seeing, Indiana being that team. And of course, Notre Dame gets Howard Cross back, which is going to be huge. I think that really impacted that pass rush against USC, not having him back. And of course, Riley Mills, they had a great – you watch that USC game, they just double-teamed Riley Mills the whole game because you didn't know Howard Cross. Well, you could try that if Indiana tries that. You've got to deal with Howard Cross now. You know what I mean? So,
right.
And I thought they were just worn out. And I actually think, Bill, going into the playoffs, I think the USC game was exactly what Notre Dame needed. They needed that game where they were challenged for 4 quarters. They had to stay locked in. The last time Notre Dame was in a third quarter where the game was really actually thought, they may not win this game. It's Northern Illinois. Even the Louisville game, you never thought Louisville was going to win. You're just like, what's the mark? Is it going to be 14? Is it going to be 7? You never felt they're going to lose. They led every other team at halftime, usually by double digits. They'd put teams away early. This is the first time they were actually in a game at halftime where it was close. And then, of course, they took a 14-point lead into the fourth quarter, and USC battled back and made it competitive. And I think they needed a game like this where things weren't going their way. Somebody had to step up and make a play in a clutch situation, and they hadn't been in that since September 6th. If we're being honest, they hadn't been in a game where that was needed since September 6th. And I think that's something that helps them, along with the 3-week rest, is going to help them going into the postseason.
One final question. I'll let you get back to your rundown and your own show here. But have you thought about? I thought about Penn State got the tiebreaker for the Big Ten championship game by a very small margin over Indiana. Had Indiana gotten the tiebreaker and gotten beat by 14 points, 17 points to Oregon, do they even make the playoff?
No, I think it's the same thing that we talked about this with SMU. If Clemson would have just kept on SMU, 31-14, just punch one more in, SMU scores, it's a 38-21, 38-24 game, they're out, Bama's in. And I think the same thing would have been true if Indiana would have gone into the Big Ten title game. If they would have lost by a game where it's 14-17, they're just not in it. It's just not competitive. I think they'd have dropped them out and put Bama back. And I think the committee was looking for a reason to put Bama back into the 12. But I think the way that SMU came back, it would have been impossible after what Ward Manuel had said about we're not going to punish teams that lose the conference title games and all this kind of stuff. The minute it became a close game, you were like, well, we can't drop them out now. And I think the same thing would have been true if Indiana would have been in there. If they would have got smacked by Oregon, I think they would have dropped them out. They were far enough down where I think they would have dropped them behind Bama. But if they would have lost the same way Penn State did, I don't think they would have dropped them out.
I just feel like their berth is tenuous at best. They were lucky they didn't have to play that Big Ten championship game, and they almost had to have. And I think that'd have been a bad matchup. Bender the other day, I think the championship games. A lot of people are saying they've been devalued, and they have probably to a certain extent. But given the schedules, the unbalanced schedules within these leagues, you can have your SMUs and your Indianas not really play anybody and finish way up there. But if you have to go to the championship game, that's a valuable data point to evaluate them against a good team.
The only one I'd push back a little bit on is SMU, because they actually did play several of the top teams in the SEC or the ACC, and they also played BYU out of conference. They played an 8-win TCU team out of conference. Had to play Louisville on the road, beat Louisville on the road. That's a good football team.
I think Louisville was their only one in the top 5 or 6 in the league.
I thought they had 2. Pitt was also. Well, they had 6. There were 6 teams other than SMU that finished above 500 in the ACC. They played 2 of them in the regular season. They played Pitt and they played Louisville. Both had those because what was
7-0 and then 7-5.
Huh?
Pitt went 7-0 and then
they got smacked when they got to league play. There's no doubt but that's also probably why I felt the ACC was a little bit. That's a different conversation for a different day. But to your point though, Bill, it's like you look at the SEC, for example, there's the schedule Georgia had, there's the schedule Bama had, and then there's the schedule that Missouri had, and then there's the schedule that Texas had in 3 varying degrees, right? And And when you have this 16, 18 team leagues, it's like you're going to look at Penn State and be like, well, they didn't play anybody. They only played really one good team all year because Michigan was down. Well, they actually didn't play Michigan this year. They really played one good team all year because USC was down. But even if USC was good, that's only 2 really good games all year. And then Ohio State has to play Oregon. They have to play Michigan. They have to play Penn State. But it's like you guys did this to yourselves. I don't have any sympathy for you. You did this to yourselves by adding all these teams to your league. You didn't need to do that.
Right, and that was my point. Was so now they got to play a good team at the end of the season, at least,
Right.
And so if we get rid of those, now you're going to have suspect second, third, fourth, second place teams that we didn't necessarily see play the iron of the league.
I'm going to give you something to chew on, Bill, and we're going to discuss this over the summer.
Okay.
What about these bigger leagues doing this? SEC, Big Ten, go to 8 league games, 3 non-conference games. In the last week of the regular season, you begin a 2-round, 4-team conference tournament. And the teams that don't make it, you then schedule another conference game where they have to play each other. And so 1 and 4 highest seeded teams play, and then 2 and 3, and then the winners play in the conference championship game on championship weekend. Something to think about.
That solves it a little bit more than what I was saying. Yeah, because now it's 2 data points
right
that the community gets to see against good teams.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know the coaches would love it because you wouldn't know who your opponent's going to be in that last regular season week,
Right.
And that would affect rivalry week. You'd have to maybe move that up a week, that kind of thing. But I think things like that, you're going to have to get creative with things like that because there's no possible way to make the schedules balanced because of you don't know who's going to be good from year to year.
Right.
You can say, well, we want to give this team a tough schedule, so let's put Florida State on their schedule, who just went 13-1, and then all of a sudden Florida State sucks because of the way the portal works. And so it used to be where, like, okay, you would always know Penn State always had to play Ohio State and Michigan. Michigan always had to play Ohio State, or Ohio State and Penn State. Alabama always had to play A&M and Ole Miss and LSU, and you always had those games. Now it's like one year you may have a gauntlet of a schedule, and the next year you may have a cupcake. Like Georgia, 23 schedule, incredibly soft. 24 schedule, brutal. You know what I mean? It's like because you never know who's going to be good, who's not going to be good, and it's just going to create a lot of imbalance. And when they cry about it, I'm like, well, this is your fault. You did this. You're the ones that kept adding teams to your league and created this, atrocity that we're seeing now. So stop crying about it because 100%. You did this. You know what I mean? ACC doesn't need to add Cal, Stanford, and SMU if you guys don't start this process. You know what I mean? So, Oregon, don't cry about all the travel you got to do, which they haven't so far, to be honest with you, because you chose this to a degree. The school that I had the least sympathy for is USC, because they're crying about their schedule. We've had to go to it. Well, you guys, you're the one that started this. If you guys would have done this, Oregon would still be playing in the Pac-12. Washington still be in the Pac-12. So I just don't have a lot of sympathy for those teams. But, Bill, great stuff, man. Everybody, if you want to find Bill's work, obviously you can always go to Sporting News. That's the best way to find all the content that Bill Trocchi and Bill Bender have. If you want to find Bill Trocchi's work on Twitter, you can always go there at Bill Trocchi, Trocchi. You can find him there as well. So, Bill, thanks for so much for being with us. And of course, everybody, that's why you need to be on the CFB Nation podcast, because Bill is and Bill Bender and Bill Trocchi are both, they're the co-hosts of the CFB All-America show. You guys have an episode out today. You kind of gave your recap of the bracket. You talked about the Bill Belichick stuff. You guys had a lot of different things to talk about. So definitely check out those guys at CFB Nation. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
All right. Thanks, Brian. That was fun.
Take care. So, Trev, there you go. Bill Trocchi, my dude, picking Notre Dame to win it all. I said, look at you sucking up to Notre Dame fans. for being he's still listening, by the way. But no, it is interesting to see the variance in opinions that people have about these different teams going into the playoffs, which I think is a byproduct of the fact there really aren't any great teams going into this postseason. There really aren't, so.
No, I mean, it's wide open. We've been talking about that since week 8, and just how, barring any team really blowing the doors off of multiple. Now, mind you, there was a team that was blowing off the doors of every opponent that they played, and that team is located in South Bend. But that team could never be considered an elite team, right? So, but there is no true 2018 Clemson, 19 LSU. So I agree. It is wide open. So this year it's all going to come down to the path and who can handle the pressure well, because I think like there are some coaches where it favors, you know what I mean? Like coaches that have played in playoff and big games before. But I was talking to a buddy about this. Well, how many playoff games has Marcus Freeman coached in? And it's like, well, listen, guys, like they're all going into their first 12-team playoff that they've ever had to, you know what I mean? I mean, somebody brought up James Franklin. And it's like, well, James Franklin and Marcus Freeman are both coaching in their first playoff game ever. And James Franklin has been at Happy Valley for a decade. So, I mean, Marcus Freeman's been there for 3 years, and this is his third. So, like, whatever you want to say there, you start splitting hairs. But, it's wide open. And it's who's going to handle the pressure the best, who's able to handle the spotlight the most. And, I mean, I like Notre Dame in that aspect because the spotlight's on them every week. They're nationally televised every week. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, Trev, that's going to do it for segment 1. I wanted to have some fun with that and just kind of surprise everybody a little bit with that and have Bill on. Because when he saw that, I was like, oh, dude, you got to come on the show and tell people why you see that, why you have that. But we're going to get to the defensive breakdown next, folks. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast version. And, of course, as always, everybody, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So now, Trev, we are going to get into the main topic of today's show, which is a look at the Notre Dame defense. And, this is a unit that has been, it was kind of interesting. We went into the season and I said, well, at the very least, this unit should be about as good as it was last year. You thought they'd get better in this area. You thought they'd maybe not be as good in this area. But just overall, you kind of felt like overall it's going to be about a similar unit to what it was last year. And lo and behold, that's exactly what it was. It was about what we thought it was going to be coming in the year. But what makes it interesting is the journey to get here is not how I thought they would get here. Because the whole thing you're thinking about is, well, look, you've got Jordan Patelho, who some big things are expected of, and you've got Boubacar Traore had a great offseason. You've got an All-American cornerback in Benjamin Morrison. You've got Xavier Watts is an All-American, Howard Cross is an All-American. There's so many different things that you're excited about, and then you come out in the season and it doesn't quite go the way that you think it's going to go. Howard Cross had some moments, but he wasn't quite the player he was last year, partly because he really has just been struggling with different little injury things all season. It's the hamstring, it's the knee, it's just different things. Benjamin Morrison coming back from the shoulder surgery. He comes back. He was still very good, but, a touch rusty in the first couple games. Jordan Pateljo's playing the best football of his career. Boubacar Traore's, breaking out. He's on the verge of stardom. And by the 5th game, you don't have either one of those guys. By the end of the 6th game, you don't have Benjamin Morrison anymore. And you're just thinking like, well, it was fun. It's fun while it lasted. Lo and behold, they just kept dominating and ended up having just a heck of a year. But it wasn't the way we were worried about the young guys. But it was the young guys that in a lot of instances really carried this football team outside of Xavier Watts. And then Riley Mills finally kind of the light went on for Riley Mills in the second half of the year. He was dominant. Howard starts to break out a little bit. But I tell you, it ended where we thought it was going to end, Trevor. But I don't know that I expected it to be quite looking the way that it looked. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. I mean, you look at how this season went, and for me, like this is a testament to why I think college football is the purest form of football. Like that, I love it. I love that. You have teams that have fallen off. You've had teams that have risen, and there's narratives that are being broken, and the expectations of some teams were met. It might not have been the way that you would have thought. Right. You have some teams that are playing way above their expectations, the Arizona States of the world, the SMUs of the world, the IUs of the world. Right. But then you do still have your, at the beginning of the season, if somebody was going to ask, hey, who do you think is going to make the playoffs? I don't know. Oregon, Texas, Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State. And they all did, I think, just in different ways than what people were imagining. Right. So it's cool to look at. I do believe that there is a direct correlation between when the light bulb went on for the offense and when the light bulb went on for a lot of those 5th and 6th year defensive guys, in my opinion. Like, I think some of it was, and I don't know this for a fact, right? Like, I don't talk to anybody. I just see what's happening on the field. And I think some of the defensive guys' mentality was, well, here we go again.
Yeah.
You know, we were told
the veterans. You're talking about the veterans.
Yep, the veterans. And it was a lot of, here we go again. We were told that, you know, last year we're going to have this all-star quarterback come in and he's going to lead us to the promised land. And, you know, the defense keep playing good, but the offense is going to pick us up. And then what happened? You know, in the bad games last year, the offense explodes. In the big games last year, the offense was hit or miss. And most of the time it was a miss. Let's be real. You know, and then you go into this season. Then it's like you have all these expectations. You know, we even sat around and talked about what we believed this offense was going to look like, and it didn't for the first, 4 games. And I think the Louisville game really showed the defense. I was like, okay, so we don't have to play our A++ game every single week to give us an opportunity to win. The offense can pick us up. And I think that's when the veterans were like, okay, so this isn't going to be like last year. Okay, right. This isn't going to be like 2022. So right. I outside of all the reasons that you just listed, which I agree with as well, I think that's another piece of, you know what? I think once the offensive light bulb went on, for the veterans on defense, that light bulb went on too.
One of the things we're going to talk about here in a little bit, Trevor, is the fact that the defense oftentimes did not necessarily play great out of the gate.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, the second half of the year, the offense playing the way that it did played a huge role in why it just didn't affect them. There was no snowball effect this year when they would start slow, like there has been in the past, because of that. Like, hey, look, so they'd give up an opening drive score, and then the offense would go right down the field and tie it up, right? I mean, so you think of the Louisville game, they give up that short field touchdown, and it's like, God, like you said, here we go again. Special teams letting us down. We're down 7-0. Crap, our offense isn't going to do jack because they didn't do jack against Louisville last year. That's naturally going to creep into your head to some degree, especially when you're still 3 weeks removed from the Northern Illinois game.
Totally.
And then the offense just goes right down the field and scores a touchdown. And then you give up this big, long play, first play of the next series, you get pinned deep. And then you give up this big play, and then because Louisville fumbles the kickoff, their own kickoff, remember? And Drake knocked it out. And then they start inside their own 10, and Tyler Shuck pulls it, takes off, big gain, gets past midfield. Leonard Moore comes up behind him, knocks the ball out. Okay, great. What does the offense do? They go right down the field and score another touchdown. And you have mentioned before, and you're doing it again, that was something that you felt. That is when, I agree with you completely, that is when you felt like the defense was like, hey guys, we're good. Let's just play our game. We don't have to be heroes. We don't have to go make a bunch of plays. Our offense has got us. We just do our job. And then by doing their job, that led to them making a lot more plays. And that's the whole thing that coaches try to get to players. Like, listen, when you do what we ask you to do, we're putting you in position to make a play. Like, you've got to have the trust that we're doing that.
Right.
And so when you stick within what we're doing, then all of a sudden that's lo and behold, you're in a position to make a lot of plays.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was the moment where the defense was like, hey, we're going to be okay. And then, of course, they got some rest after that game and then just kind of came out. And it's the same thing against Stanford. The offense goes down and turns it over. Defense gives up a touchdown, and offense was like, hey, guys, don't worry about it. We'll get this going. And then they just bury him. And I just think that took a lot of pressure off the defense. And then the USC game was the next time we could see that as an example of where the offense had the dumb fumble, but the defense clearly did not have it that day. Just for a host of reasons. We'll kind of get into some of them. But the offense is like, hey, guys, we got you. Right?
Yeah,
don't worry about it. We got you. You come out in that third quarter, and you score 21 points in the third quarter. It's like, we got you. Right? And then the defense says, hey, you made your first big mistake of the game on the interception. We got you now. And they make that stop, and then the offense is like, thanks, we're going to go punch this in the end zone real quick. Like, that's what makes this team so much different, Trevor, than a lot of others. And I think the defense benefits from that because they don't have the weight of the world on their shoulders every week that we have to play great or we can't win big games. I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, look, if I could encompass the season into like one phrase, one whatever, like it was like a light bulb moment season, right? Like, you go and you look at Riley Leonard's performance. And, he was struggling at the first part of the season. Once he got more comfortable in the offense and the light bulb went on and was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to put this team on my back to score 28 points. Then they started scoring 40 points a game, after only getting over 30 points once in their first four. You know what I'm saying? So it was the same thing with the defense. Once the defense kind of got that message from the offense of like, hey, we got you. I mean, they even mentioned it on the Here Come the Irish show. Riley Leonard was talking about the Louisville game and was like, that performance sticks out. I think that kind of showed our defense that it was like, you know what? Hey, we got you guys. Even if you guys might not have that start that you wanted to, whatever, we got your back. And, and then there's the little nuances, right? Injuries before would have plagued this team in the past. And then the light bulb goes on of, well, we've heard about our depth, but we don't really know how it's going to perform. And then the young guys come in and people keep stepping up and stepping up. It's like, oh, okay, so we are as deep of a team as people thought that we were. We are as deep of a team as we thought we were. So for all those reasons, that's why I agree with what Bill Trotri said. Look, I'm not saying that I'm on here calling my shots, but Notre Dame is a team that is very much in the discussion to play for and win a national championship this year.
Yep. Certainly one of those teams, and the defense needs to get back on track to what it was most of the season for that to happen. And we'll talk about kind of what we think they need to do to get to that point in time, Trevor. But let's just kind of do a quick statistical overview. And with the defense, I'm actually going to look at it two different ways, Trev. Number one is I'm just going to give you the numbers, right? So let me go up here. That's the season-ending numbers for Notre Dame. So a lot of great stuff in there. Third in points per game at 13.6. They ranked 9th in total defense, 6th in yards allowed per play, third best third down defense in the country. They ranked number 3 in the country in pass defense, number 2 in yards allowed per attempt, 3rd in touchdowns. They had the number 1 passer rating in the country, 9th in red zone defense, 1st in turnovers gained. They're now tied for 1st in turnovers gained because Texas tied them by playing a 13th game, which obviously they had their 13th game was against Georgia, and they got turnovers to tie that. Notre Dame ranks 36th in sacks. Now, that's sacks number and the tackle for loss number, just so people know, that's actually that's per game, even though I put the raw numbers, but I do a per game when we get to parts of the season where there aren't the same number of games being played. So that's their overall numbers, Trev, and that's obviously very good. The one concerning number I will say, however, is the Notre Dame red zone defense took a big dive at the end of the season. They ended up 49th in red zone touchdown defense this season because their last 3 opponents, Virginia, Army, and USC, had 9 touchdowns on 10 red zone trips. One concern I have going into the postseason is that's a bit of a reverting back to 2022 when Notre Dame had a really bad red zone touchdown defense. So that's a little bit concerning. Going into the postseason, the overall numbers look good, but they're not trending in the right direction. I think some time off should help with that. But I also kind of looked at, because the numbers that concern you are the rush defense numbers. And by the way, I don't have it on there, but Notre Dame's pass defense this year also ranked 4th in interceptions, tied for 4th in interceptions this season as well. So that should be noted in the conversation as well. But when you look at those rushing numbers, Trevor, I feel like you look at the 51 number, they gave up 138.8 this year. I feel like that's a little bit of a – I just have felt like looking at it, there's just not the proper context to that because of the fact that this year, like when it's just one option team, it doesn't really bother me a whole lot. But when you play 2 option teams, it bothers me a little bit more because, for example, Notre Dame this year – held Navy to 222 rushing yards and held Army to 207 rushing yards. That looks like, boy, you had 2 games you gave up over 200 yards rushing. Well, Army ran for 247 on the season, so you held them 20 yards below their season average. Navy this year finished with 314 rushing yards. So you held them 107 yards below their season average, but in the lack of context for what they do in the triple option, it looks like you gave up a lot of yards. So what I did is I also took the rankings against Power 5 opponents only. So when you're only playing Power 5 teams, and that tells a little bit of a different story about the Notre Dame defense. And I think this is more reflective of what they've been and who they are going into the postseason. So this takes out the 2 MAC games and then the triple option games. So in games against Power 5 only teams, Notre Dame's still ranked third in points per game. They ranked 8th in yards allowed, which is just one spot down from where they were. Still 6th in yards per play. So you see there's very little difference in the total yards. Because I think it also, people can say, well, your pass defense ranks really high because you played two option teams. And it really doesn't. So if you actually look at the passing yards numbers, they gave up more yards, right? So that's about 26 more yards, but their ranking doesn't change at all. Their yards per attempt doesn't change at all. They go from 2 to 4th in the ranking. Their quarterback rating doesn't change. It actually got better against the Power 5, the non-Power 5. When you play Power 5 only opponents, Trev, their passer rating got actually better, but their ranking went from 1st to 3rd in that situation. So, and then 2 teams ahead of them, Florida Atlantic and UAB, only played one Power 5 team. So if you talk about in games against where you had to play more than one team, or if you looked at Power 5 only teams, they're still first. And, it puts a little bit of context into how good their defense was. Because I feel like when you drop 18 spots in a ranking because of your performance in 2 games where you held your opponents by a combined 130-something yards below their season average in that category, there's some skewed statistics there. And that's why I wanted to kind of to put that in there because of that triple option. But you see it there, Trev. They rank 20th in yards rushing yards allowed per game. And that ranks 20th in the country. They rank 22 yards, 3.5 yards per attempt, which ranks 22nd. But if you look at it too, Trev, the other thing to consider is that 20th ranking, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams ahead of them that played only 1 to 3 games against Power 5 teams. So like Memphis has the number 1 rush defense against Power 5 teams because they played Florida State, right? Toledo played Mississippi State. So if you actually look at it, Notre Dame would be 13th amongst Power 5 teams that played against in Power 5 games. So I just feel like that puts a little bit more context to how Notre Dame played this year because I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at, Trevin. You look at the overall numbers and the sacks are per game, not raw numbers. It's per game. The red zone defense is 28th, but they're much lower in red zone touchdown defense. As I said, that's a little bit of an issue. And then of course, turnovers. They rank 10th, which is also, not skewed because those non-Power 5 teams are out of there. So it is looking at it. So the numbers actually get better when you remove the non-Power 5 teams from their schedule, which I think speaks volumes to the fact that Notre Dame was kind of at their best this year in those big moments.
Yeah, I always looked at their rushing yards per game with a little bit of an asterisk, right? Like that's why before I looked at these rankings with just strictly Power 4, Power 5 opponents, that's when I still really paid attention to yards per game and what they allowed, right? Because it's interesting to look at a team that is 51st in the country in rushing yards per game, but then like 9th in the country in total yards per game, right? So yeah, whenever you play 2 triple option teams, like it becomes relative to like what is good to stopping Navy, what is good to stopping Army. Like now if we would have said that Notre Dame gave up 207 rushing yards to USC, not a good look, right? But if we say that, hey, they held Army to 207 rushing yards when they go for 330 plus a game, it's a heck of a game, right? So no, I'm glad that you put these numbers together. I mean, I don't know if it does for anybody in the chat, but I mean, it certainly puts my mind at ease a little bit as far as rushing yards. And what we've seen so far this year is when Al Golden commits to stopping the run, for example, what he did to Jamal Haynes in Georgia Tech, they can, right? Mm-hmm. Al Golden has done a terrific job this year of taking away what an offense wants to do best. Yep. Right. And for the Louisville game, it was a little different than the Georgia Tech game. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that is a factor in the numbers a little bit too, because when you go and you look at the points per game and the yards per game and the turnovers and the red zone touchdowns allowed and their third down defense. And, I think it tells a story a little bit when you look at it with some context that this is a really good defense of stopping what teams like to do. Mm-hmm. You held Army 130 yards below what they get per game. They held Jamal Haynes to 15 rushing yards on 8 carries when the week before he had a $170 and 2 touchdowns. So it's it puts my mind at ease a little bit, especially moving forward to the playoffs. I think that's why Notre Dame might not be getting looked at highly nationally, but a lot of those questions are around the offense. Everybody, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, believes in this defense, and these numbers back it.
The only concern I have going into the postseason is, can Notre Dame do both of them relatively well in the same game? That's going to be the question. Because that's not something we've seen a ton of this year, where teams can do both. You look at the Louisville game, and their numbers there were a little bit aided. Let's be honest, aided by the fact that they had a minus 42-yard gain on a punt that sailed over the punter's head, right? And they gave up a lot of ground in that game. We talked after the fact that we kind of felt like that's what they were willing to do, because of that's not how Louisville's going to beat you. But overall, they still did a pretty good job in that game, really, because you could also say, like, well, okay, yeah, they also gained a 40-plus yard game on a ball that Notre Dame stripped the ball out of the quarterback's hand on a blown assignment. So those numbers are kind of more reflective of what they did outside of one play against Louisville. Like, okay, that's fair, right? But that's going to be the thing, is because there are going to be teams that can challenge them, Indiana being one, that are kind of good at both. And you've got to figure out, okay, well, which one are we going to shut down? Which one are we going to really try to take away? Is it your throwing game? Is your passing game? And that's going to be, kind of what the focus is going to be. So, but again, what this all shows you, Trevor, is whether you're looking at it from this way or that way, either way, this team is really good when it comes to playing really top level defense. They are. They're really good.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, like, look, for the majority of the season, I think it's fair to say that Notre Dame's defense kind of carried them to where they were. Now, it's awesome to see that the offense came alive, after that first bye week and started hanging 44 points a game on teams, right? But, the defense was still kind of the marquee. Like, the way that I look at it, I expect Notre Dame's offense, with how they're put together, to score over 30 points a game. Like, I just do, right? But I think the more unrealistic expectation is to, up until the USC game, they didn't allow an opponent to score over 14. Mm-hmm. Am I right in that? From the bye week to the USC game, they didn't allow an opponent to score over 14.
You are correct.
Those are crazy numbers.
Yeah, Navy had 14, Georgia Tech had 13, Virginia had 14, Army had 14, and Georgia Tech scored in the last minute of the game, and Virginia scored in the last minute of the game.
Okay.
So if it's not for literally touchdowns in literally the last minute of the game, they would have held 1, 2, 3, 4 of their opponents to under 10 points in down that stretch. And I think Army also had a very late touchdown in that game as well.
That was one of the things that I was going to bring up about the red zone defense for touchdowns allowed. I know at least 3 of those were allowed on the second team defense.
Army also scored in the last minute of the game.
Yep.
So 3 of those touchdowns were in the last minute. Now, that doesn't mean that they go from 89th to 6th.
Sure.
Right? Because USC went 5 of 6.
Yep.
Those weren't garbage touchdowns.
Yep. Totally.
You know what I mean? So that is good context. And somebody in the chat also mentioned that. But again, when you look at that game against USC, they didn't go from 5th to 6th. So, I mean, to your point, Trev, you say, well, they haven't played an offense like Indiana's. So, well, they have. They've played a couple. I would argue they've played 3. One of them was missing their starting quarterback. So you throw that one out. But Louisville and USC are very comparable, in my opinion, either schematically and results-wise or talent-wise. USC is that way talent-wise. Louisville is that way from a result standpoint. So, and similar balance and similar scheme, and a lot of things that they do are comparable. So, and the talent is somewhat comparable at certain spots to kind of what they do. So that's kind of how I look at it, Trev, and breaking this team down and looking at Notre Dame. That's what we see. That's what we see from this Notre Dame team. Just kind of as a first glance look at who they are. And then you dive into the next part of the conversation is, okay, what are the building blocks that we believe Notre Dame has right now? Not what they can have if they improve, or just where are they right now, big picture. What are the things you look at right now and say, these are things that they have that are championship caliber, And then also, these are the things that are potential stumbling blocks, because there's both. There's building blocks and stumbling blocks. And the teams that go on runs are able to emphasize the things that they have, that the building blocks, and they're able to find ways to overcome or bypass the stumbling blocks. So we're going to talk about both of those real quick before we dive into more. Like we said, the way we're doing it, it's more of a macro versus look at the overall defense, and then we'll do more of a micro look that's more specific to winning games. So when you look at the first, to me, Trev, building block for a championship, it really boils down to if Howard Cross is back healthy. That's a big part of this. So this is an asterisk, and we believe he will. You have an interior defensive line that has for the last month of the season has played as good as anybody. And the asterisk to that is also by Howard Cross going out, Donovan Hinish and Gabriel Rubio were forced to play a lot of snaps, and Donovan Hinish absolutely balled out. And if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, for example, Trev, from beginning with the game that Howard Cross left early, because he had to leave early, Donovan Hinish in the last 4 games of the season was really, really disruptive. I'm going to pull up his numbers here real quick. In the last 4 games, according to Pro Football Focus, he had 8 total pressures, 3 sacks, 2 more hits on the quarterback, and 12 run stops in the last 4 games alone. That's Donovan Hinish, not Riley Mills, Donovan Hinish. He was playing outstanding football. Just to give you some context, Trev, that 12 stops, if just the last 4 games, would rank 10th on the defense. If it just was that last 4 games, would rank 10th for the entire season, would rank 10th. And the pressures, right? So I said he had 12. What did I say he had? How many pressures I say he had in that one? He had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. His three sacks plus 2 hits on the quarterback, so that's 5, would have been in the top 6 or 7 on the defense for the entire season. So if can Howard Cross come back and keep playing like he was before the injury, and can Donovan Hinish keep playing like he did? And then also by Donovan playing a little bit more, you don't have to bring Howard back at 50 snaps, right? So I think the moral of the story is, with Rubio back healthy, with Mills, with Hinish's emergence, and then, of course, with Howard Cross coming back, you have an interior group now that has the starting power and the depth and the playmaking ability to be really, really good. Because as good as Donovan is, you saw against USC, they were like, we'll take our chances with Hinish and Rubio. We're going to double team Riley Mills. If Howard Cross comes back healthy, you're going to pay for that even more if you try to do that in the postseason. And so I think that's the number one building block that I look at, Trev, and say right up the middle of the defense is where I think this Notre Dame defense is really, really good if Howard Cross is back for the postseason, which Marcus Freeman said they expect him to be.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier in the show about when the light bulb went on for the defense, and a big part of that is when the interior, the defensive line stepped up. Now you fast forward to the end of the season, also according to Pro Football Focus, they compiled some data and they came up with the number 1 interior defensive line in all of college football in terms of sacks, and it was Notre Dame. Notre Dame has the number 1 interior defensive line in terms of sacks, according to Pro Football Focus. So the interior is, I mean, key to so many different facets of stopping an offense. I mean, we've talked about it before. When you're a quarterback getting pressure right up the middle, it's tough, man. That is a tough spot to be in. When you are looking to stop the run, especially, and I know we're about to get into it with the linebacker speed that Notre Dame has, you got to stop it up the middle. One of the biggest issues early on in the season is teams had success kind of running right at Notre Dame, running right into the teeth of that defense. And so that speaks to the numbers of stops that, some of these guys are getting. So, yeah, I mean, interior has to be awesome in the playoffs. Well, okay, sorry, let me rephrase. The interior of the defensive line has to play the way that they did this season.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. The other thing, too, is the USC game aside, where the secondary, one member of the secondary, actually 2, I don't think Jordan Clark played that well in the final regular season game as well either. Your secondary, for the most part, this season has been outstanding. Not even talking about when from the moment Benjamin got hurt, because you can't count what it was before he got hurt. Well, it was great when Benjamin was playing, but it sucks now. But we're going to say it's great. No, it's what it has been since he got hurt. it has been, in my opinion, still an outstanding secondary. They had a really bad game against USC. But when you watch that game, Trevor, this isn't USC guys just running by Notre Dame guys and they just can't run with them, which we've seen. This wasn't like God love him, love the kid, great kid. But this isn't like Clarence Lewis, where he was trying to cover and dudes were just running by him. This was Christian Gray peeking in the backfield, which he's not supposed to do. This is Christian Gray grabbing instead of transitioning the way he's taught. This was a tired guy that was played with not the focus you want, and it hurt him. This is Jordan Clark after not having played basically for 2 weeks. Because Jordan Clark played very little against Army. And so, and I also think that can't be dismissed either. The fact that Notre Dame had spent the entire previous week preparing for him playing a team like Army, and then you've got to come play a team like USC, I think hurt them quite a bit. Jordan Clark played 4 snaps against Army. And then he's got to come back that next week and play against USC. And he was getting beat doing things that we have seen Jordan Clark not do this season, like biting on a first move, and then the guy beating him. That's not what we've seen from him most of the year. So you could, just like we said we're gonna be fair, and I'm not. If you just think what Indiana did against Ohio State is exactly how it's going to go against Notre Dame, I think you're kind of dismissing how good this Indiana team has been all year. Right. I mean, in the same thing here, if the only time you watch Notre Dame play was USC and you're like, that secondary sucks. Well, yeah, sure. That game, just like if you watch the Georgia defensive line against UMass and Georgia Tech, you're probably thinking they suck because they did suck those 2 games, but that's not who they are in the course of an entire season. So I still believe this secondary, especially with 3 weeks off, is without question a part of this team that you look at and say, that's championship caliber. I mean, Xavier Watts already been named to 1 All-American team with the Athletic. I'll be shocked if he's not a unanimous All-American again. At the very least, he'll be a consensus All-American again. His statistically and the film is better this year than it was last year. Leonard Moore has been outstanding as a starter. Adon Schuler's had a phenomenal sophomore season. And Christian Gray, outside of a couple games here and there, has been pretty darn good. And then Jordan Clark's been pretty solid all season. So I think this secondary, Trevor, is still a part of this team that you look at and say, when they play their game, not when they play out of their minds, but when they just play their game, do what they're told, this is an outstanding secondary.
Yeah, I've said it all year. I think the secondary is the strength of this defense. I do. Like there's a reason why Al Golden, in my mind, is okay with giving up some yards on the ground. Because he knows that this secondary is it's a lockdown secondary. And I don't think that there's any way around it. It's a deep and it is a lockdown secondary. And I'm with you. I think the sample size against USC, like I think that there's more that attributed to their performance than just, they're just bad. Because if that was the case, then they would have gotten worked by Colin Lacey and Ja'Cory Brooks and Chris Bell on September 28th. You know what I mean? Like this isn't the first good receiver that they face. This isn't the first good receiving core. Like I know Stanford's quarterback is not good, but Alike Eomena is still a really good receiver. And even
Mosley has had a pretty good freshman season as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And even when he hasn't been able to get, like, even when Ashton Daniel isn't able to get him the ball, it's not like he was running wide open because Notre Dame just couldn't cover him. And, the D line was just eating. Like, this is a good, really good secondary. And it's going to be something that they need going into the playoffs because I will say, you look at Notre Dame's regular season, and they would play a really good passing team, and then like 3 teams that could not pass the ball to save their lives if they wanted to. And then they would play a good passing team, and then they'd play a triple option team. And that, whereas in the playoffs, you're going to be facing I guess the outlook is a little different with Georgia now, barring who starts at quarterback for them. But you go through and you look at their potential path, and if it's what Bill Trocchi was talking about, you have IU with Curtis Rourke, who's going into a 6th year, which is he's a really experienced kid. He throws a pretty ball. And then if they make it to the semifinals, they might face Penn State with Drew Aller. And then if they make it to the national championship, they're playing Oregon, and we know what that pass offense looked like. So, this is going to be a time where the secondary is going to be leaned on heavily. Like the way that I look at it between interior D-line and secondary, like that's 1A, 1B to me. When you're a defense and you're looking at the foundation and the building blocks, what you need to be a championship caliber team, you kind of need the 2 strongest points of your foundation to get you there. And that's the interior of the defensive line and the secondary.
I think the other thing they have is, oops. Sorry, Trev. I just needed everybody to look at me when I'm talking. Look at me when I'm talking.
No, that was it kind of worked out. Well, that was dramatic. You're like, another thing is,
listen,
and then
Trev.
it just zoomed in.
It's like, hold on, how do I even do that? Listen, Trevor. No, don't even know how I did that. I had to look at it like, hold on, what button was that? The other thing is, I do think that the speed at linebacker is going to be very important for the playoff because the different types of offenses you're going to have to face to make a playoff run. There's a big difference between Indiana and Georgia, just like there's a difference between Georgia and Penn State if you get them, or Georgia and SMU, or Georgia and Boise State. And all three of those teams are very different from Oregon or Ohio State. And so having linebackers that can play different type of game but have the speed to match up in different ways, having a Mike linebacker that runs like Drake Bowen, having a Will linebacker that runs like Jack Kaiser, having a Rover / Will / whatever you want him to do like Jaden Ausberry, having a linebacker that can come off the edge like Jalen Sneed and play with the twitch he has. I actually had someone tell me the other day that he hasn't seen Notre Dame's linebackers play fast all year, and I was floored. Somebody whose opinion I respect, by the way. I was floored. I'll tell you who it is after the show. Floored. And I was like, wow. Because I made a comment on Twitter about how I'm watching the SEC title game, and I'm thinking, when was the last time you watched the SEC title game and you're thinking, Notre Dame's every bit as athletic as these guys? And guy kind of had a pretty harsh response to it, and I was surprised because I respect him a lot. So I reached out to him privately on Twitter, and he was just I was like, wow, that's some interesting takes. Still respect him, but this is just one we happen to disagree on. But I think these guys can run. And I know that there's some people that are down on the linebackers, especially Drake Bowen. I don't see it. But, I think these kids can flat out run. And that's going to help them when they get into these different types of matchups in the postseason. And I think that's another part. And then also on top of it, this is a very disruptive defense in a lot of different ways. And I think those are all aspects to what I think are foundational aspects to, if you keep doing this, right? Because what a foundation into a championship is, if you just keep doing this the way you have most of the season, that's good enough to help you be part of a championship run. It's not, well, you had two great games you had two great pass rushing games against, I don't know, whoever. And boy, if you do that in the playoffs, you're going to go 4-0. Well, hold on a second. You're telling me you're going to double in 4 games what you did twice in a 12 game. That's not realistic. This is more of a keep doing what you've been doing the vast majority of the season, outside of the USC game and I don't know, even a quarter against Northern Illinois. You know what I mean? Like, this has been really, really good. And no, it was not Bill Bender.
Yeah, I mean,
it was someone who's a Notre Dame related person, which is what surprised me.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, you're asking your defense to do what they did for 10.5 games. And that is a very realistic ask. It's the same thing that we talked about the offense yesterday. Same like with the defense. We're not saying, hey, listen, guys, if you come out there and hold every opponent to 7 points, I think we like our chances. Yeah, no, duh. You know what I mean? But just play at the level that you had been. I mean, for the linebackers, I'll be honest with you, that was my surprise group of the season. Not that I thought they were going to be bad, but it was a lot of speculation at the start of the year. A lot of it was you're kind of betting on the potential. You know what I mean? Outside of Jack Kaiser, who was even starting a new position. So you go and you look, and it's like, man, this Drake Bowen kid, like, he was awesome. He played hard on special teams, and he's really good sideline to sideline. I hope he is what he was cracked up to be. He was. You look at Jaden Ausberry, and it's, man, we hear nothing but his speed. He's a good tackler. Let's hope that carries over into him getting more reps. Absolutely did. I think he's 3rd or 4th on the team in tackles, and he doesn't even start. You go and you look at Jalen Sneed, and he's kind of been that defensive specialist a little bit for Notre Dame. Like, hey, you're going to be in this situation on this down against this team, right? And he's done what he had to do. And before he was hurt, unfortunately, Kingston was doing the same thing. But I agree. I mean, when you have speed at linebacker, it allows you to do so many different things. Because, Brian, to your point, you're going to be facing a lot of different teams in the playoffs, right? Like, I brought up the Georgia game. If Notre Dame beats Indiana and moves on to play Georgia, even within that now, their linebackers were going to be used differently than if they were playing Carson Beck. Now they're playing a guy in Gunnar Stockton who's a little bit more mobile, but the speed can kind of help all.
If you think of the 3 potential semifinal opponents, if you are able to get it's either you're facing Ashton Genty, who, in my opinion, should be the Heisman Trophy winner, is the best player in college football, which is completely different from how you'd have to defend SMU and their mobile quarterback, and it's completely different to where you have to play Penn State, where you've got to deal with a dynamic 1-2 punch at running back. One's explosive, one's a power guy, and oh, by the way, they have the best tight end in college football who teams just can't figure out how to stop.
Yep.
Like they put all their resources to stopping them, and they still can't stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like having linebackers like this can help you in those matchups, right? I mean, there aren't a lot of teams that have linebackers who can run with Nick Singleton on a wheel route. Notre Dame does. They have a few. You know, not a lot of teams can run with Tyler Warren. Notre Dame has a few, right? And so, and especially if at some point in time they get Kingston back at some point in time, and I don't know if or when he'll be back in the playoff, that's another part of it, right? Is you have to have those linebackers who can do that. And those are aspects. And of course, as we mentioned, how disruptive this defense has been all season, you know, with turnovers. And it's not just like fluky turnovers. I mean, that's the thing that you look at and you say they rank 8th in the country in passes defensed, and see 4 of the teams ahead of them have played 13 games. You know, so this is a team, Trev, that has been very disruptive this season with and again, the turnovers, we're not talking fluky turnovers where, you know, the ball hits a receiver right in the hands. I think there's been one pick. I think there was a pick against Louisville where it hit a guy kind of in his hands. And it was in tight coverage, but it hit and it flew up and zit. But you got to be there to be in the perfect position to pick it off.
Sure.
It hasn't. It's been stepping in front of throws. It's been pressuring the quarterback. He sails a throw and Don Schuler's right there to pick it off, right? It's things like that where you've got to put yourself in position to make those plays, and they are. And it's like, well, yeah, that one throw that, you know, Xavier Watts picked off Caleb Williams. Yeah, he overthrew the guy because he threw off his back foot. Well, why did he throw off his back foot? It's because there was a guy right in his face. Right? Those are forced errors, forced mistakes. And they've made a lot more of those. They forced a lot more of those this season than we've had. And it's been all year. Like you talked about, Trev, the defense getting more comfortable. So they had 5 pick sixes this year. 4 of them came after the first bye.
Yeah, man. I mean, we talked about it in the run game at the fact that you kind of have to look at some of those numbers in a little bit of a different light because you play 2 triple option teams. One thing that I think that is incredibly impressive is they still rank 8th in the country in passes defended and played 2 triple option teams. Right? Like I think that's something that people aren't understanding. Like there's teams out there that just play literally 12 teams with traditional offenses. I think that's fair to say. Notre Dame ranks better than, quick math, 126 of them and played 2 triple option teams. I think Army threw it 4 times against Notre Dame.
Yep. 2 of 4.
That's crazy. I mean, that's like for anybody that wants to know how truly good this secondary is, look at that stat. They're 8th in the country in passes defended and played 2 teams that don't pass the ball.
And they broke up 2 of those passes against Army. I mean, they had 2 breakups against Army, and they had 2 breakups against Navy, who didn't pass a whole lot more than Army did in that game.
Right,
they only passed 14 times in that game. Actually, sorry, that was what the Notre Dame offense did. Navy passed. Let's see here. Actually, they passed 20 pass offense. Yeah, 14 times. That's 14 times against Notre Dame. That was it, right? And so, and Notre Dame in those 2 games had 4 pass breakups and a pick. That's pretty good.
Yeah. How good's Notre Dame's secondary? They got interceptions on triple option teams.
They got 4 pass breakups and an interception against 2 triple option teams who have combined to go 18 and 4 this season, with 2 of those 4 losses being to Notre Dame. 18-2 against non-Notre Dame opponents, right? I mean, that speaks to it. But that's, again, win a championship is because that continues in the postseason. Now, let's talk about some potential stumbling blocks, Trevor, and here's a couple for me. We did talk about how good the secondary is, but the one thing about it is it has been a bit inconsistent at times because it's young. And so in the postseason, you can't have as many of the ups and downs from certain parts of that secondary. So that needs to be a little bit more consistent. We did talk about that. And the other one to me is really the biggest stumbling block for me of things they can control. And because you can't control injuries right now, and we'll talk about those later. But the things that they can control is the edge rush is the one thing that could potentially be a little bit of kryptonite to this team. If you play a team that's really good up the middle or has a good scheme pass pro-wise and keeps Riley Mills and Howard Cross from getting after the quarterback, and it now comes down to, can your edge rushers get to the quarterback? If not, you're in trouble. This team could potentially be into that. If we look at, like we talked about on offense, the pass game, if Notre Dame doesn't make a run, what could be some of the reasons why? The edge rush, the inconsistency from the edge pressure guys is concerning for me. It is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the overall play of edge rushers, combined like in the pass and run game. I mean, we just highlighted all of the premier running backs that they might be able to face, or potentially a mobile quarterback. You're going to have to set the edge when you are containing on defense, right? Push everything and funnel it back inside, which overall, like I think they're built a little bit better to do than they are on a strictly pass rush. I mean, for as much as people want to dog on RJ Oben this year, he's done a good job in the latter half of this season in the run game. He has. Josh Burnham, that's kind of his bread and butter right now.
That's Josh's wheelhouse.
Yes.
Stopping the run is exactly where Josh Burnham thrives.
Yep. But their play overall encompassing is like an edge rushing group. Like how is it going to be done? How well can Bryce Young set the edge and run game? Can Junior Tuihalamaka emulate what he did the regular season and get after the quarterback? Because, we talk a lot about them double teaming Riley Mills, and then, they're willing to take their chances on the interior with Donovan Heinisch and Gabe Rubio one-on-one. Junior Tuihalamaka was also one-on-one and had a couple of opportunities to get a sack, and he wasn't able to finish against a more mobile quarterback in Jaden Mayava. So, it's going to be, are you able to finish plays? Are you going to be able to get after the quarterback with what you're able to do? And, those are really big question marks for me. And if there is a potential stumbling block on defense, I think to be honest, we kind of got a glimpse of that against USC, right? There was essentially no pass rush, and Mayava was able to just kind of sit back and play point guard for a little bit. So, and then, consistency on the back end. Secondary is going to have to do well, both in the pass game and the run game. Like, there's going to be, I have praised Notre Dame secondary this year for being a really good team tackling in space. And that's going to have to be something that remains in the playoffs. Because
as poor as Christian Gray played at times in coverage, his ability to come up and stop the run and perimeter screens was a huge part of their ability to shut down USC in that game.
Oh, yeah.
I think in the first drive of the game, he comes up and on 4th and 2, they throw a little slide route. I think it was Zechariah Branch, and he just comes up and drills them. Great open. You think of the Georgia Tech game where I think it was 21-7. Maybe it was 24-7. I think it was 21-7. Yeah. Georgia Tech's going on a drive. They end up missing a field goal because they ran a jet sweep to, I believe it was Eric Singleton, who's now getting offered millions of dollars. And it's him and Jaden Osbury in space. Man. And Jaden was like, sorry, bro, this ain't your day. Because you're not me.
And
you know what I mean?
And he had tackles of the season.
And he had 4 or 5 places off the top of my head like that, where Jaden Osbury, who's a backup linebacker, and I use that word loosely because I think they're all kind of co-starters the way that they play snaps. But he had 4 or 5 plays this year where it's just like, it's either Jaden or that guy's going, and Jaden was like, no, don't sweat it. I got you. But that's the part of the thing that why this defense works, because Al Golden trusts those guys in space. He trusts Christian Gray in space. He trusts Jaden Osbury in space. He trusts Drake Bowen. He trusts Kingston. He trusts those guys in space. And for the most part, they've rewarded them for it. And those are the things you look at and say, hey, man, this is where, you've got to be able to step up and make those kind of plays.
Make plays in space, man. Did it. There's going to be some really good playmakers down the stretch if Notre Dame's able to make a run.
Yep.
And that can do elusive things in space. And they've been tackling well all season. And that's gotta remain. That's gotta remain a constant for them.
So we're going to get to some more stuff here, Trev, in a few. We're gonna get to sort of more specifics of what we need to see from Notre Dame in this postseason. But I wanted to remind everybody that before we move on to the next section, if you could do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit the notification bell. I've had a lot of people say that just because they're subscribed, they're still not getting notifications. I don't know if you need to text YouTube about that, but we have been getting a lot of people complaining about that. But that's why we also try to stay on a regular schedule and let you guys know when there will be schedule changes. Also, we always put schedule changes up on our message board. So, that's kind of a big deal there as well. So if you're on there, you'll see that we get these things on there as well. So definitely check that out. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. The people in the chat that are board members will tell you it's definitely a great place to be, great community, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very much looking forward to some of the stuff that we're going to have here soon on recruiting, and then once we're able to talk about the portal stuff, there's going to be some interesting stuff there that we'll have, and we're also in the new year. We're going to plan a lot of changes for what kind of content goes on the free site, what kind of content goes on the message board. We're going to start putting a lot more of our breakdown content on the message board only, as opposed to where we put it out on our free site. So it's going to be just reserved for people who are on the message board as well. So we'll have a lot of that and some other changes coming to the website here when we get closer to the new year. So definitely want to check that out. So and you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So Trev, these last two sections of the show are going to focus more on specifics, right? Like just really diving into more the type of the granular look at this football team. And so we're going to talk about the areas where Notre Dame has to play at a high level and areas where they need to show improvement if this defense is going to be a key to a championship run. And when it starts, it really starts with the areas where they have to continue to thrive. And I think the pass game, efficiency in the pass game is huge for the defense, which equals for them creating inefficiency on offenses. That is a big thing. And you want to know why Notre Dame is a really good third down defense? Because they force a lot of incompletions, which means they're making a lot of stops on third down, but also when teams are completing less than 50% of their passes, all those first and second down throws that are going incomplete, well, guess what? That means they're going to be in a lot more third and long type of situations, and that's a place obviously where Notre Dame needs to be and be really good at. So this team has been very good at forcing teams to throw a lot of incomplete passes. And most of the teams that rank pretty high in this area are teams that are really good on third down. If you look at the top 5 teams in the country when it comes to top 5 teams in lowest completion percentage allowed, Notre Dame, Utah, and Northern Illinois are all also in the top 10 in third down defense. Notre Dame is 7th, Utah's 3rd, Northern Illinois is 2nd. Notre Dame is number 1 in pass efficiency defense or opponent combined quarterback rating. And when you look at some of the teams they might play in the postseason, beginning with Indiana, the more you can force incompletions, the better chance you have at stopping them and getting them off the field. That's going to be a big, big part of this for Notre Dame. Is this has been a strength of you all season long. You need to continue to make sure it remains a strength for you going into the postseason. And it's not a surprise that Curtis Rourke's 2 lowest completion percentage games of the year came against Michigan and Ohio State, which also happened to be games where Indiana had their least effectiveness on offense. They scored 15 points in both games. They scored at least 31 points in every other game in the season. And so create a lot of incompletions, a lot of tipped balls, a lot of incompletions, a lot of pressure, a lot of those things. Then Indiana, the offense won't be able to be as effective. Georgia's a similar situation. Penn State's going to be that way. SMU's going to be that way. Not a lot of teams are good in third and long. And that's been a huge part of Notre Dame's success, and that has to continue in the postseason.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a really active secondary. And you brought it up a little earlier. It just always feels like, with a lot of Xavier Watts's and Don Schuler's interceptions, it's not like they're matched up one-on-one in coverage and they're just, they're going up one-on-one with the tight end and they come down with the ball, right? I'm not saying they don't have that ability. It's a testament to those are 2 guys that do their job. They're in the right spot when they have to be. And the rest of the secondary is very active. They're also where they have to be. You brought up that interception against Louisville, right? That was pretty tight coverage that Ben Morrison had on an under route that he was kind of struggling to cover earlier in the season. Like receivers kind of got a quicker first step on him than he did. But Xavier Watts was right behind him. Ben Morrison was blanketed in coverage. It results in an interception, right? Keep creating those inefficiencies throughout the entire secondary. That also includes linebackers in coverage, right? In my opinion. So, yeah, I think that if they're able to stay as active as they have been this season and continue to do that, teams are not going to have a lot of success passing on Notre Dame. And I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. That's just, there's 12 sample sizes of teams not really having that much success outside of USC. Louisville had their moments, but it wasn't a super clean game for Tyler Shuck and Ja'Cory Brooks. And there's a lot of different factors. I mean, at one point, look, the way that I look at it is Notre Dame had 2 games where their secondary was kind of little iffy, some question marks. Louisville, where Christian Gray was ruled out 2 hours before kickoff. Ben Morrison went to the locker room, and at one point, Jordan Clark was playing field corner. And the other one was against USC, where the team was just visibly dog-tired. I don't want to be that fan. I don't want to be that guy that's, well, in the 2 games that they played bad, there's actually really good reasons as to why. It's not that they were just not as good. Right. But I do believe that it's not because they were just not as good. There were extenuating factors that kind of led into it. And they still won both of those games. So, but yes, pass game inefficiency's got to be huge. I knew Notre Dame was up there in forcing incompletion. I did not know they were forcing teams to be below 50%. That is
only team in college football. And the next closest, Trevor, was at 52.4. That's Utah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
That's decent.
A couple other things that need to be the areas where they need to thrive, Trevor, is the best version of the run defense we've seen for a chunk of this year needs to be there. And I felt like that was a part of the defense that got a lot better in the second half of the year. There were some times where it's like, they're not bad, but they're not good. I feel like the second half of the year, they were a lot better in the run game. I think the only exception that I would say that I really was kind of annoyed was probably the Florida State game. They allowed a few gash runs to happen that just kind of bothered me. They bottled everybody else up really the second half of the year when it came to the run game. They shut down Stanford. They shut down Virginia's run game. I thought they were a very good, a really good rush defense in the second half of the season, really keeping teams in check. Virginia had 128 yards. They got some of that on scrambles and late in the game. And then obviously USC was able to run the ball effectively, but a big chunk of USC's rushing yards came on that last drive where they ripped off like back-to-back long 20-yard runs when Notre Dame was basically just giving them yards, which kind of pissed me off. I'll be honest with you that they gave that up. But it just kind of it influenced the stats a little bit. But the point is there has been a little bit of this from the run defense where it's not consistent. You're going to need the best version of that, not for some, big picture, view of, championships are won by stopping the run. It's not even that, Trevor. It's just looking at their path. If you can't stop the run, you're going to have a hard time beating Indiana. You're definitely going to have a hard time beating Georgia. You're definitely going to even have a tougher time beating Boise State or SMU or Penn State. And good luck beating Oregon or Ohio State or Tennessee if you can't, or Arizona State if you can't stop the run. It's more practical than it is, a coaching principle of you have to stop the run. Because, look, if the playoff was made up of a bunch of teams that threw the ball all over the place, a bunch of Louisvilles and a bunch of air raid teams and a bunch, I'd say, look, just don't get killed on the run. But you got to really be on that. You look at the teams that Notre Dame's going to have to play; they're going to have to be really good against the run. And so you're going to need the best version of your run defense to be there this season or in this postseason if you're going to be able to make this run. Doesn't have to be elite, shut down. It doesn't have to be like Georgia Tech. Every game doesn't have to be like Georgia Tech, but it has to be good. It has to at least be good. Like they were elite against Georgia Tech. It has to at least be good every week. And then if you get a couple games where it's even better than that, great. Like if you have to play Boise State in the semis and Ashton Genty goes for 120 yards, I don't care as long as he does it on 35 carries. You just can't let him get there on 18. You know what I mean? That's when you get gashed. And so those are the things you look at, and we're going to need to see the best version of that part of this defense in the postseason.
Yeah, I think that goes into playing a balanced defense. Like we said, Al Golden does a really good job of taking away what offenses want to do successfully, but now it's not going to be as easy. That formula is not going to be as simple as it was in the postseason. You know, like it's not going to be as simple as, guys, we have to stop Jamal Haynes because they have a backup quarterback that's starting. And if he throws for 200 yards, he throws for 200 yards. But I don't believe that's what's going to be enough to beat us. But then you go through and you look at the makeup of some of these playoff teams. Actually, I mean, really all of the playoff teams, honestly. And it's not going to be as simple, maybe Arizona State, but it's not going to be as simple as, hey, if we shut down this facet of their offense, they're not going to be able to do much. You know, so it's all encompassing. It's being able to stop the run when you have to and being the best version of yourselves this season that we have seen you play as. But it's also, hey, like we also need the best version of the secondary. You know, I mean, SEC championship game was a prime example. I mean, even when Carson Beck was in the game, I think he went into halftime with like 54 passing yards, you know, but then at the end of the day, like they resorted to the run. And everybody knew that it was coming because they had a backup quarterback in and they still couldn't stop it. So it's going to come, Texas being. So it's going to come down to, can you play a balanced defense? And some of that is, hey, dude, Al Golden, you're going to have to get your guys ready. You're not going to be able to just allow 160 yards on the ground, but you shut down their passing game. You know, like these teams are put together a little bit better than that. So, yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. But yes, best version of the run defense is going to be critical because I think with the players that you're going against, that 120 to 140-ish number, like that'd be on par. You know what I mean? Like if like it's not going to be like in the regular season where you look at, dude, how did Florida State get 140 rushing yards on you? And it's a little bit of a different lens where it's like, yo, you held Ashton Genty to 130, to your point, off of 38 carries, whatever that is. So as long as they're able to perform and do what they need to and be the best version of themselves, it's going to set them up for success.
We talked about the red zone D earlier. That's got to improve. That's got to be what it was most of the year, not what it was in November. The final thing is an area where this team really needs to thrive is Notre Dame has been a bit inconsistent at times rushing the quarterback, but have been a surprisingly good pass rushing team overall. And we brought up earlier the concern that we have about the edge rush, right? But overall, Notre Dame's been a pretty decent team at getting sacks this season. But even more importantly, in getting sacks, they rank 13th in the country in sacks per game against FBS opponents. The reason I put that in there is because you're just not going to get a lot of sacks against two teams that combine to throw the ball 18 times, Army and Navy, when you're playing those triple option teams. And so when you take that out and you just go sacks per game, not total sacks, because then that can skew it because all the non-FBS teams or non-Power 5 teams are going to be out of there. But when you look at it, Notre Dame ranked 13th in pressures this season, and only Boise, SMU, Texas, and Oregon are the only playoff teams to be ahead of them in sacks per game. They're at 3.13, so Ohio State is behind them. Indiana is at, Indiana is at 32nd. Tennessee is tied with them for 32nd. Clemson is at 29th. Georgia's at 29th. Ohio State is at 25th. So they're in the top half of the bracket when it comes to pressures. And even though they don't register super high volume of sacks, they have been a pretty disruptive defense this season in different ways, whether it's safety pressure. We've seen Notre Dame bring a lot of pressures from the safety level, whether it's the linebackers getting a ton of pressures. They haven't blitzed the linebackers nearly as much this year as they did last year. If you look at the numbers, Drake Bowen and Jack Kaiser have combined for 110 blitz, basically pass rushes this year. If you look at last year, for example, J.D. Bertrand had 104 by himself. Maris Leofau had 129 by himself. So they haven't blitzed their linebackers nearly as much this season as they did last season. And a lot of the pressures that they are getting from the linebacker level are coming from Jalen Sneed, who has 66 pressures, but that's mostly in third down, lining up on the edge of the defense type thing. So they haven't been as voluminous when it comes to pressures. But if you look at Jaden Ausberry, he's credited with, according to Pro Football Focus, 32 pass rushes on the season. He has 10 pressures on those 32 pass rushes. So if you gave him the same number of snaps that Maris Leofau had last year, he'd have over 40 pressures at that rate. He has 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Trevor, which is a really good number to have for a linebacker who only blitzed 34 times. Drake Bowen has blitzed 46 times. He has 5 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. And so, when you look at like last year, for example, and I talked about this, how J.D. Bertrand was a pretty disruptive player last year. J.D. Bertrand on 104 snaps last year had 11 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So if you look at, so he had 104 pressures. I'm just going to do this real quick math. Drake Bowen had 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. He played 46 pass rush snaps. If he played 104 snaps like J.D. Bertrand did last year, he'd have 11 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So he's getting to the quarterback at the same exact rate J.D. Bertrand did last year. He's just doing it on a lot less snaps. If you look at the combination of the two Wills, which is Jaden Ausberry and Jack Kaiser. Jack Kaiser hasn't been quite as productive as he was last year on a per snap basis, but he's still been pretty good. But if you look at those two together, they have 12 pressures. Jack has 12 pressures. Jaden Ausberry has 10 pressures. So that's 22 pressures on the season. And they have had a combined 96 total pass rushes. So if you do that for the number of snaps that Maris Leofau had last year, they'd have an average of they'd have a total of 30 pressures on that per snap basis. Well, how many pressures did Maris Leofau have last year? He had 25. So the actual success rate of getting to the quarterback is identical to slightly better than it was last year when they had a pretty good pass rushing linebacking core. The difference is they're just not asking them to do that this year as much. A big reason for that is I do think overall they're getting better pressure from the front at times. And also, I think there's a much greater faith from Al Golden that they can cover. So they don't need to pressure quite as much as they did last season. So when you look at the overall pressure numbers this season, Trevor, they're not where they were last season from any sort of individual standpoint outside of Riley Mills, who this season has 33 pressures and 12 hits on the quarterback in 12 games. Last year, Riley had 32 pressures and 12 hits on the quarterback in 13 games. So he's already matched his numbers from last year despite playing one fewer game. Howard Cross has kind of come along, but there's just last year they had 267 pressures in 13 games. This year they had 209. But this year in those situations, Trevor, they still have 81 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Last year they had 92. So they're not that far off, and they still have a game to play. And if you remember last year, they had a lot of those hits on the quarterback were in the Oregon State game against the Ducks last year. So the success rate has been similar, even though the volume isn't there. But I think in some of the bigger games, we've seen the pass rush really step up when it matters most. That has to be true in the postseason. Has to be. And getting Howard Cross back to form would be a nice part of that, but you're going to need, like you said, you're going to need your edge rushers to provide a little bit. You're going to need Donovan Heinrich to continue to do that. And I have a feeling we might see the linebackers kind of ramp up their cover, their pressures a little bit more this year. But also you brought up somebody yesterday. Bryce Young only finished with 14 pressures this season, and he only had 5 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. It should be pointed out that 8 of his 14 pressures came in the last 4 games. He only played 17 snaps against Army. So if you take that out, the last 3 games against Power 5 teams, he's had 8 pressures, 3 hits on the quarterback, and a sack in his last 3 games against Power 5 teams. So you're starting to see that success getting to the quarterback starting to get there, which made your prediction the other day, yesterday, of a potential breakout player that could have a big impact. That would be one that we could potentially see, and that would obviously have a huge impact. But this is an area where they have to thrive, and I think the numbers show that they're capable of it. But it's something that they're going to have to do this season, Trev. No, in the postseason.
Yeah, man. I mean, the stats that you just rattled off for the linebackers, to me, that speaks to efficiency. And they might not be doing it in the volume, but they're still reaching it at the same pace. I do think it's a testament to the coverage downfield, and I think that this is a better coverage linebacker unit than it was last year. I do believe that they're longer, they're faster, they're a little bit taller, they're more rangy. So you're not going to use them like you used a 6'1" JD Bertrand, So I think that's a factor as well. But I agree. I mean, getting pressure on the quarterback is going to be number one, especially situationally. Al Golden is one of the very few defensive coordinators in all of college football that's not afraid to send the house on third down, because he knows that you can trust your coverage on the back end. And if you get home on some of these quarterbacks, maybe not even get home and complete the sack, but if you get a pressure on, you get a hand in somebody's face, it's going to be favorable for your guys. It's just most likely going to get a football just kind of thrown up in their direction. So, yeah, pressure is going to be huge. I said it yesterday that there's a direct correlation with the number of sacks that Curtis Rourke takes in a game and the amount of times he turns the ball over. Direct correlation. So speaking of that specifically with the IU matchup, I know we're kind of talking big picture here. So then you go look at the Georgia game. Well, you're going to have a guy in Gunnar Stockton potentially start, and that's going to be his first career start in college football in the quarterfinals of the first 12-team playoff, right? Pressuring that guy is going to be huge. Drew Aller has shown his biggest knock is being able to handle pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That's been his biggest knock since he's gotten into college, and then you go and look, Dylan Gabriel's been fantastic this year, and if there's going to be one way that you're going to try to disrupt him, I would look at my odds and my chances of, what does Notre Dame have a better chance of? Shutting down Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart? Maybe, but I don't think you can bank on that as hard as you can getting into the face of a 5'11" quarterback. You know what I mean? So pressuring the quarterback for next Friday and onward, if Notre Dame is to make a run, is going to be massive. Massive.
It should also be noted in these pressure numbers that last year Notre Dame's cornerbacks and safeties, not the nickel, but the cornerbacks and safeties, last year had 7 pressures on the quarterback. This year their safeties and cornerbacks have had 16. So that also adds to it's coming in a different way, but they're still getting pressure on the quarterback, and they have to be at their best in some of these games, no doubt about it. And so a couple aspects, Trev, where they need to improve. We talked about one already. You've got to find ways to get pressure off the edge, because if you can't rush with 4 in some of these better opponents, you're going to get in trouble. If you have to blitz Dylan Gabriel all game, let's say you get to the title game, if you have to blitz him all game to get to him, he's going to make some big plays. You'll get to him at times, but he's also going to beat you because he's got dynamic pass catchers to throw to. And it just takes one mistake with that group, as Penn State showed. It takes one mistake against those guys to result in the big play or a touchdown. So the edge pressure is going to have to be a big part of it. Another aspect too, Trev, because we did talk about that a little bit already. But as good as this secondary has been, they have been prone to big plays in the pass game. And it's a very interesting statistic, Trev, because when you look at Notre Dame's rankings this season, they rank 3rd in passing yards allowed. They rank 2nd in yards allowed per attempt, 3rd in touchdowns allowed. They're top 10 in total interceptions. They're number 1 in passer rating. But then they ranked 46th in yards allowed per completion. Now, some of that is a tad skewed by you've given up a couple big plays against backups, but that's not enough to where you go from 20th to 46th. Right, so if you take away the big play at against Purdue, for example, that came against your backups, where Kennedy Urlacher took out 2 DBs on the play, that doesn't change the statistic that much. And so that's an area that you look as could be a little concerning as you look to some of these matchups against teams like Indiana in round 1, potentially SMU, potentially Georgia, potentially Oregon. You think of that and you're like, boy, you gotta. You say, well, that you had the busted play against Northern Illinois and you had, the Louisville guy, but those things happened. You did have that busted play. You can't say, well, if you don't have that busted play, because you did have that busted play. You did give up a couple deep balls to Louisville, right? Okay, yeah, but they required good throws. Well, quarterbacks in the postseason are going to have receivers and quarterbacks in the postseason are going to be good enough to do those things. So get a little bit better jam at the line. Have a little bit better position, where maybe you're a little bit more hip to hip with a guy, those type of things. So you got to figure those things out. And, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I mean, I think some of it is just a byproduct of how disruptive and how aggressive this secondary plays. I do. And so far this season, it hasn't been a detriment. You know what I'm saying? Like, you play aggressive, and like sometimes you get that notion that when you're an aggressive football player, you kind of get that Marcus Peters, Trayvon Diggs reputation, right? You'll make some big plays, but you also give a lot up. Notre Dame has avoided that so far this year. They've avoided hey, they got a guy that can go for a pick six. They also have a guy that might give up 6 routinely. So it hasn't been too much of a detriment, but I like that you put it where the defense must improve. I would kind of file this under it's where the defense has to be a little bit more cautious than what they were potentially in the regular season as well, because you're giving up big plays, but I also don't want them to sacrifice what made them so good and be like aggressive. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of how I look at it.
I don't mind them being aggressive. What I mind is when you're not disciplined with what's behind it.
Sure.
And there's been a couple times you're like, okay, you're bringing the house here. Why are you playing press coverage against a guy that's really good at the line? Or why are you playing off coverage against a team that wants to throw quick slants in front of it? Like it's been stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like that got a little bit frustrating. It's like, why aren't you taking the inside away? Because this team loves to throw glants and slants against pressure. Those type of things. Like it can be a little bit frustrating at times with that. It's cleaning up. So, and sometimes it's like you were supposed to take the inside away, but you didn't. And they just got to clean some of that stuff up. But that comes when they're at their best, they're mixing things up. You think Christian Gray's playing off coverage, so you bang an outside hitch throw, or you bang an outside slant throw. But little do you know that he's driving on your route because he knows you're going to do that, and that's how he's had almost 3 pick sixes this year. Is because you think he's playing off coverage, so let me just quickly hit this slant route on him.
Totally.
And then boom, next thing you know, he's actually not playing off coverage. He's not playing bail. He's playing off, but he's not playing bail. He's playing off so he can drive on any quick throws, and that's allowed him to have a lot of the production that he's had this season. So the big thing is going to be the best way to prevent this from being an issue is you have to play disciplined football, right? That's obviously a big thing. But the other one is a lot of things we talked about before. If you start getting them in pass-heavy situations, then you're going to increase your chances of not giving those up, because on 3rd and 10, you're better prepared to defend against those things than you are on 2nd and 2 and 3rd and 2 and things along those lines. And that's where they're going to have – that's why that's so important. So discipline on the back end is going to be huge against the teams that they play in the postseason.
Absolutely.
And they're going to have to be better there. So, and then the final piece, Trevor, is a big one. This defense has been surprisingly prone to giving up long drives at the beginning of games or scoring drives at the beginning of games. And what's ironic is you and I have been critical of this. We actually looked at, and for the last 5 games, Notre Dame has only allowed 1 field goal in the first quarter. But I do think they've still been vulnerable. They've been able to step up and make some plays. And so, like, you look at the USC game, USC goes right down the field. They get into Notre Dame territory. Notre Dame has to make a 4th down play to really kind of be in a situation where they could, make a stop on 4th down and get off the field without giving up points. But they still were kind of vulnerable to letting them move the ball a little bit. And that's something that they're going to have to improve, in my opinion, Trevor. I mean, we saw it at times. They've been really good. I mean, Army, they were great. I think they forced Army out 3 and out on their first 2 drives before allowing a touchdown in the second quarter. And then, they were up 14-0 at that point in time. And then after that touchdown, they then finished the hat. So they had 2 3 and outs and then touchdown drive, and then 3 and out, fumble recovery. I mean, that's the kind of dominance that you want coming out of the gate. And you need to see more of that and less of what we've seen at other times where they've allowed teams to kind of move the ball a little bit. Virginia was a perfect example of, you force a 3 and out. They go on like a little nice 35-yard drive where they kind of get the ball near midfield. And, you're kind of thinking, okay, you're letting them move a little bit. But then what do? You turn them over on downs. I'm fine with that. And then the next drive, 3 and out. The next drive, 6 plays, 22 yards punt. Next play, 3 and out. Next play, forced fumble. Next play, 3 and out. Next drive, interception. Next drive, interception. Next side. Look, if your offense plays the way it has most of the year and you do all those things, you're going to have a lot more than 28 points at halftime, even if you're playing in the playoff game. Right? So they had a 28-0 halftime lead against Virginia and didn't even play that well in offensively because the defense did that. But then there's the Florida State game where they let Florida State kind of go right down the field and get into scoring position. Navy kind of shot themselves in the foot. Navy had converted at least 1 first down before they had 6 plays, 24 yards. It was 1st and 10 when they fumbled that ball. So they had already converted a 3rd down and in position where they had ran on 2nd down and 7, got a 1st down. they were kind of putting a drive together before they fumbled. And that's something. Their second fumble was near midfield, so they've been a little bit vulnerable in the first quarter to giving up some ground. I'm okay if that happens in the playoff as long as it doesn't result in points, especially touchdowns. That's the big thing. You're not going to just come out and completely shut Indiana down. I mean, heck, Ohio State shut Indiana down, held them to like 156 yards or something, 150. They gave up 70 on the first drive of the game. So I mean, it doesn't mean that you're doomed if you give up an early scoring drive, but I do think that is an area where they need to improve is being better on those early downs at forcing punts, getting turnovers to where your offense can go spark you to a lead. I think that's a big part of if they can improve a little bit there, then this defense is going to really roll and play champion. Because again, what's the standard? It's not being one of the better defenses in the country, but are you playing championship football? Is this going to be good enough to win a championship? Those things were good enough to beat Florida State, and Virginia, and Army, and Navy, and Stanford, Georgia Tech even. But is that going to be good enough to beat Indiana, to beat Georgia, to beat Penn State, Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee? That's a different level. And that's an area where I think this defense can and must get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think along with all the things that you just listed off, the one that I would add would be in the games where Notre Dame's defense came out and was the best in the first quarter, it's the games that they dictated the pace. It was the games that they decided, hey, no matter what you really do, like you're not going to be able to move the ball on us. And now, again, might be a little bit unrealistic in the playoffs when you were facing higher caliber offenses than the Stanfords of the world, than the Virginias of the world. I'm very well aware of that fact. But it almost feels sometimes like Notre Dame's defense kind of goes out there on the first drive to just kind of see what the offense is going to do. And then when they get a little taste of it, they're like, okay, that's done now. And then they just don't do anything for 3 additional quarters.
I can live with, Trevor, sure. Because if you come out too aggressive and they've got something for you, then they're throwing a ball over your head and you're giving up a 50-yard touchdown.
Right.
So I'm actually okay with that overall, but do what you did against USC. Force a stop.
Yep.
Right? Like, I don't care if they get to midfield or the 40, as long as you force a stop and don't keep them from scoring. Yeah. That's a big key for me.
Sure.
It's not, you better force 3 and outs on your first 3 drives or I'm going to be pissed in the post-game show. No, it's keep them off the board, but also to try your best to make sure that they're not getting so deep that they're pinning you inside the 10, and that's where your offense gets to start their game. And now you're in that place.
Sure.
For the first half of you're constantly backed up and the field is flipped and those type of things. So that's kind of where I mean by that. You just got to keep the points down. Got to keep the points down and let your offense get caught up as well, especially in the first round game where it's like it's been 3 weeks since you played. I don't think they're going to come out rusty, but just in case they do,
yeah, right, then your defense has got to make sure that they keep them, keep the points down enough until the offense figures it out, and then you're in a good place. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm okay with that happening, especially if it doesn't result in points.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it too, I will say, I don't want it to eat up too much clock.
Yeah.
Either. Like that is my, it can't be something to where, if IU receives first, right? Notre Dame defers to the second half and they go on a play that eats up 7 minutes of game clock before Notre Dame's offense is able to take the field for the first time. So I'm okay with that. Yeah. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, if it takes up seven minutes of game clock, but like they don't score, then that's a win, right? Like I'm not going to be too upset about that. It's just, we talk a lot about Notre Dame's rhythm offense and all that thing. So that's more of a preference. But at the end of the day, yeah, first quarter's got to be solid for, 4 games. It's got to be solid if Notre Dame wants to make the run we believe that they can. So couldn't agree more.
So Trev, those are areas where Notre Dame needs to step up and play better, and areas where they need to continue playing great football here down the stretch. I'm going to add one more. They have tackled a lot better in the second half of the year than they did the first half of the season. That's got to continue. Now, you could say, well, they haven't played as good at teams in the second half. I would argue that the teams that they've played in the second half of the year aren't as good as they were in the first half, but the offenses they've played in the second half of the season are better than the offenses they played in the first 6 of the season. Because if you think about the best offenses they played, if you look at the first 5 games, the only really good offense they played in the first 5 games, in my opinion, was Louisville. That's it. Second half of the year, they played better offenses. You played Navy, who's got a really good offense. Army's got a really good offense. USC has a very talented offense. Georgia Tech has a very talented offense. And I think those are the games where I thought you saw their tackling getting a lot better. Now, I thought against USC, there was some out-of-control play at times. You had Don Schuler had a chance to lay a running back out, but he went out of control and low and whiffed. And it was, you got to avoid that stuff. So that's an area where it's like, keep doing what you're doing prior to USC at times. Like you had Gabriel Rubio missed a sack up, or missed a tackle at the line of scrimmage, then ended up turning into a 20-yard run. Riley Mills and Josh Burnham both missed sack opportunities. Like those things didn't get you beat against a USC team that's talented, but also not a playoff team because of a lot of other issues. Teams like Indiana, teams like Georgia, teams like Penn State, teams like Oregon, teams like Ohio State, you miss those opportunities against them, they're going to make you pay for it in a much bigger way than the teams that you beat the last 6 weeks. So tackling has got to be on point in this playoff as well, at the line of scrimmage especially. If you get a chance to stuff a running back at the line, you got to do it. You get a chance to sack the quarterback, you've got to do it. And those are going to be big, big keys to this as well that we didn't dive into enough, but that's a huge part of this success for the defensive play to champion. I feel like all these teams in the playoffs, whoever defenses are the most disciplined and tackle the best, are going to have the best chance at being consistently good week after week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, one thing that they did a really good job of that they did not do a good job of at the start of the year was running backs getting extra yardage, ball carriers getting extra yardage after contact. And they have done a much better job of that in the second half of the season. It's just got to be, I mean, it's super fundamental and it sounds super basic, but it's just 11 hats on the football. You know what I mean? 11 gold helmets need to be rushing into gang tackle. And they've done a really good job of that the second half of the season. I mean, Army's defense had no idea what to do. Army's offense had no idea what to do, man. I mean, it's just whoever turned the corner, there was 3 gold helmets waiting for him. You know, you're up the middle, it gets stuff. Like Kanye Udo did not have a whole lot of fun against Notre Dame. You know, so it's got to be a lot of that because you look at some of the running backs you're going to face. I mean, you know, Justice Ellison and oh gosh, the other kid's name is escaping me.
Tyson Lawton.
Yep, Tyson Lawton. They're good running backs. They run really hard. And if you come in out of control and you come in too high and you don't try to gang tackle, like they will break tackles. That like no matter what. So and obviously we don't.
Keyshawn Williams is that way, and Miles Price is that way, or no, Miles Cross is the slot guy, right? It's Miles Price and Miles Cross are their 2 starting field receivers.
Yep.
And it's that way too in the second round. I mean, you know, Georgia's got guys, Nate Frazier, Travis Etienne, or Trevor. Trevor Etienne. Those are guys that if you don't tackle well, as Texas showed in the second half of that game, you don't tackle well, they can hurt you.
Oh yeah, Texas's defense wanted nothing to do with Trevor Etienne, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you got to be able to tackle well as a team, also tackle well in space. Like it's got to be clean performances. It can't be, you know, shades of Notre Dame teams in the past where they just wanted nothing to do with physical football. Come in under control, tackle well in space, stuff runs when you have the chance. Yeah, 100%.
So, Trev, that's going to do it for that final portion. Actually, that's going to do it for that final portion. We do have our 3 big keys coming up next. That's what we're going to end things on. But before we get to that point, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And, of course, as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trev, as we get into this last segment, we did this the other day, and it was a lot of fun. It's what are the 3 keys to being to a championship run from the defense? The stuff above, a lot of it, all of it, was things that are in their control. A lot of these, 2 of these 3 keys will be things that are in Notre Dame's control. The first one is going to be a little bit of, it's kind of in your control, but in a lot of ways, it's not in your control. And that is the first key to success for this Notre Dame defense is health. You've got to get Howard Cross back and healthy. You've got to stay healthy as you get through the rest of the postseason. Notre Dame's depth and the way they've recruited in the last couple years under Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden and the staff has allowed them to overcome losing both starting Vipers, your original starter, and then your second starter who was playing just as well, if not better, than the first starter, at least against the pass. Patojo was playing really well against the run. Boubacar was a really impact pass rusher early in the season. And then you also lose, Howard Cross hasn't really been healthy for much of the season. You lose Benjamin Morrison at the midway point of the season. Kingston is now out. Howard Cross has missed the last 3.5 games. You just look at it and you're saying, boy, they've been able to overcome a lot of injuries this season. Your Jason Onye is out, not an injury, but he's out. Gabriel Rubio missed a chunk of the season. They've had to overcome a lot, as we talked about early. They're at the point now where they're okay if they can just stay healthy from here on out. If they, hopefully Kingston can play in this game. If not, hopefully at least get him back for the Georgia game. You don't want to go the whole postseason without him. He's been a very important part of this defense. You can kind of get by the last couple games without him. But if you want to make a title run, you're going to need all those linebackers present and accounted for, right, including Kingston. And so you're going to need him back at some point in time, hopefully. But you just can't sustain any more injuries. I don't know where you can point to and say, well, they'll be okay there. They'll be okay there. I think they're at the point now where it's like, no, you can't sustain anymore. You have to be able to stay healthy. That's going to be a huge, huge key to this, to a potential championship run, is this defense staying healthy down the stretch.
Yeah, man. Lauren Landau is going to have an opportunity to prove why they brought him into South Bend. It wasn't to get you through the first 12 games. A college strength and conditioning coach could have gotten you through 12 games. But Lauren Landau, with his NFL experience, having to prep teams to play 16, 17, 18 games a year is, I believe, a big factor as to why they brought him in. And you're right. It's not only getting healthy, it's remaining healthy. Because the playoffs and postseason is such an interesting time because, in the regular season, you can sit back and think, okay, well, we can sit this guy and hopefully, ideally, we get up and up. We'll call the game and such that maybe we can rest these guys to keep them fresh. This is playoffs, man. There is no, hey, we're going into this with the idea that we can rest somebody. If you rest somebody in the playoffs, it is a pleasant surprise. That's my thing. Right, you have to go into every game like it could be your last, because if you don't take care of business against IU, it doesn't matter who you have healthy for Georgia. You know what I mean? So it's going to be really interesting to see how they balance that out. Now, I do think that Notre Dame was helped out quite a bit this year with, even as tired as they looked at times against USC. I think they were helped out severely of only playing in the fourth quarter of like 4 games this year. You know what I mean? So I think that's really, really going to help. So for me, it comes down to staying healthy. Get healthy. It sounds like Howard Cross is going to be back just fine. He even dressed for the USC game. They just didn't run him out there. I think they just had him put on pants and a shoulder pad, and then they just kept his helmet, But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how they fare from a health perspective, because I'm with you. It can't be anymore. It can't be. God, I don't even want to sit here and try to speculate what position group could potentially make it through. Just stay healthy, man.
Need it. No doubt. Let's get to number 2. And we've talked a lot about this in the show, and we're going to talk about it again here, Trev, one more time. If Notre Dame goes on a championship run, what is one thing that we will see relatively consistently from the defense? They are able to put pressure on the quarterback. That is an absolute must. And yes, we need to see better pass rushing from the edge, of course. But it's not just that. That's never going to be the strength of your defense. It just can't be a weakness. It's your dudes got to be dudes, right? And where's Notre Dame dudes? Right up the middle. It's got Riley Mills has to play like an All-American in the postseason. Howard Cross needs to play like an All-American in the postseason. Jack Kaiser's got to make some more big plays. We talk about that big Xavier Watts interception, but it was Jack Kaiser getting through and just bursting through on a pressure that got in that quarterback's face and didn't let him read the defense and caused him to throw that ball up that Xavier Watts took back to the house. Drake Bowen's got to be at his best. Jaden Alsbury's got to keep doing his thing. If you get Kingston back, he gives you some of that. You're going to need your linebackers to be effective there. When you bring safety pressures, Don Schuler's a guy that they've used a lot on pressures this year. Xavier Watts has 6 pressures this year against the pass. So those are all things that you look at, Trev, and you got to say, I don't care how you do it. You're going to need it in different ways. Sometimes it's going to have to be the defensive line. Sometimes it's going to have to be the backers. Sometimes it's going to have to be the secondary. I don't care who it is. But overall, your pass rush is going to have to be consistent in the postseason. That's going to be a huge, huge part of this. If Notre Dame goes on a run, that'll be a reason why. If they don't, this will be one of the reasons why. If the defense doesn't play championship football, this will be one of the reasons why. If they win a championship, get to the championship game, this will be one of the reasons why. Their ability to have a relative consistent pass rush, and especially pass rush in big moments, are going to be huge. Third down, 2-minute, end of game, momentum need, it's not just, okay, you had 8 pressures, but okay, when did those 8 pressures happen? That's going to be a big part of a championship run if they make one.
Yeah, and on top of those, the one thing that I'll add is have answers if what you thought was going to work is not working. That's my thing, right? If you thought that this, third down lineup that you had, call it a NASCAR package, whatever you want to call it, was going to get home on the quarterback, and it's not, be willing to adjust. Not just say, well, I just hope at some point it gets home. If a certain alignment isn't getting home the way that it should, you know what I'm saying? Like if linebacker pressures aren't working, or if blitzing up the A gap isn't working, look at outside pressure, send a corner fire, send a Don Schuler, Xavier Watts off the edge. Just have an answer for any possible scenario. Because what can happen is just like, well, I guess the pass rush isn't getting home today. Can't happen. Just can't. Experienced guys like Curtis Ork will eat you up if you give him time. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think if Notre Dame makes a championship run, I think that we can look back and say, yeah, man, the pass rush was getting home and it played the best that it did all season. It basically was a highlight reel of what, they're taking the Florida State game. They're taking the Virginia game. They're taking the pressure that they were able to get on Wegman and like that, basically second half of the Texas A&M game in there. And it's got to be there. Got to be there, man.
What you don't want to do at the end of the year is have this thought of after game, if only they had Boubacar, or if only they had Batoho, if only they had, you want to say, hey, boy, we'd love to have him, but hey, we figured out a way to make it happen. And that's going to be a very, very important piece to this thing for Notre Dame. And then, of course, you still continue, got to recruit better at that position and develop better at that position. Sure. And all that,
sure,
especially on the edge. But the potential's there. I mean, if next year you look at like Bryce Young and Boubacar Traore, if he's healthy again, Logan Thomas will be in his second-year strength program. You're adding Chris Burgess. You look at guys like that. Burnham will now be in his third year as an edge player. Tuilamak. I mean, there's potential for this edge to be really good getting after the quarterback in the future. It just right now they're just not there yet. But overall as a defense, it just has to get there. And then the final piece to this, Trevor, is big plays are going to be huge for a championship run. And big plays are all encompassing. It's not necessarily big plays from a yardage standpoint. It's all encompassing. And so here's what I mean by it. It's you got to make a lot of them and not give up a lot of them. That's really what it comes down to. You can't give up a lot of big plays where it's 3rd and 2 and they, break one off for 40 yards, or it's 3rd and 11 and they break one off. They convert a third down. It can't be where, your offense has all the momentum and then your defense gives up a big play for a score. It can't be those. If you give up a 50-yard run, you better flip and tackle that guy and hold him to a field goal, right? It's like those type of things. You can't give up a lot of those big plays. You can't have dropped interceptions in these type of moments. We saw that against Ohio State last year, right? Like some dropped interceptions, you can still beat A&M. You can still beat, Miami of Ohio. You can still beat Purdue. You can still beat Florida State. You can still beat all these teams. You're not going to beat Ohio State that way. How do I know that? Because I watched it happen. You know what I mean? I watched it happen. And that's the thing is when you get those opportunities on the biggest stage, you've got to make those plays. And I think that's going to be a big part of this team making a run is you don't give up a lot of big plays, but you make a lot of big plays. In big plays, what are big plays? Big plays on defense there's the obvious ones. Interceptions, forced fumbles you recover, defensive touchdowns. But it's not just that. It's 3rd and 2 and you stuff a running back in the backfield to make it 4th and 4. Now they got a punt. It's 3rd and 6 and you jump a route and you break it up and you force them to punt in a moment where your defense needs, desperately needs to get off the field. It means it's a 21-7 game. They're driving for a score, and Jaden Osbury tackles a dynamic athlete who's, people are throwing a ton of money at right now in the portal in space to stop them, hold them to a field goal that they then miss, that gets blocked by Bryce Young, right? It's that all that stuff is all encompassing. It's who steps up in the biggest moment and says, okay, our backs are against the wall. They're driving on us. I'm going to go out here and make this play. Or you're down. I think of like the Clemson game last year where Notre Dame's getting beat convincingly at halftime. What helped get them back in that game? First drive the second half, I believe, Xavier Watts picks off a pass, runs it back to the 1 yard line. You punch the ball in the end zone. Next thing you know, you're just like that. You're back in the game. You can't give up a lot of big plays, which means not just yardage, but then missed. What is also a big play that you're giving up? It's 3rd and 2. You have a chance to hit a quarterback, 3rd and 5, midfield. You miss a quarterback sack. He gets away, scrambles first down, hits someone for a first down, hits someone for a score, those type of things. That's giving up big plays. You missed an opportunity for a big play. Trev, big plays are going to be huge in this game. You got to make them, and you can't give them up. That's going to be a big, big key for this defense. And this is a defense, Trev, that scored 6 touchdowns this year. Would be nice to get another 1 or 2 in the postseason.
Man.
Right? It really would. But yeah. Just you don't even have to do that. Just make the big plays in that moment. Pick a guy off at midfield and let your offense go do its work, right? But get that ball.
Yeah.
Get that ball.
Yeah, be selfish. Own all the big plays. To your point, don't give any up and want all of them for yourself. Just make sure that you're putting yourself in the best position that you can to win. And the defense has done that all season long. All season long. I mean, look, the more and more and more you look at college football, the more and more teams are willing to go for it on 4th down. Those are huge. Teams not converting on 3rd down, I view that as a turnover. That's like picking off the pass at the line of scrimmage, right? Like that is like stripping the quarterback on a sack and recovering it. So the way that I look at unconverted first downs, off of a 4th down, that I view that as a turnover. So do everything that you can to do it. You have an Indiana team coming to South Bend that they have nothing to lose. They're playing with house money. They weren't expected to be here in the first place. They're going to throw everything that they can at you. They're going to be going for it on 4th down. They're going to be testing your defense in every single possible way that they can. And you just have to be able to win that play. And then you fast forward, if Notre Dame bests IU, they go on and play Georgia, the SEC champ, the team that has no sort of quit or no sort of fight in them. A big play in that game could be if Notre Dame jumps out to a lead. Georgia, in every game that they've been able to come back and compete in, there's always that one play that you can go back to and be like, that was it. For the SEC championship game, it was that catch that Lucky kid had on the sideline where it just toe drag, barely got it in by an inch. I mean, if that kid was wearing a size 13, not a size 12, that's an incomplete pass. You know what I mean? But you can always go back and look at Georgia this year in the games that they've came back and either made it competitive or won. They have that play. A big play for Notre Dame is stopping that play. So winning big plays is going to be huge, crucial. Didn't know if I was going to say huge or crucial. So crucial.
That's it. I mean, anything else that kind of pops in your head, Trevor? I mean, we talked about a lot of things, but I think those 3 things stand out. I mean, you said, well, you don't have stopping the run in there. I mean, some things are assumed, right? Don't give up 250 rushing yards. But talk about what's going to be the really big keys that if they make this run, these 3 things go really well for Notre Dame. I think that's it right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only thing I would add is all encompassing. Just play disciplined football. No dumb penalties. No targetings. No. And I know targeting is now about as subjective of a penalty as you can call. Sometimes it just feels like if you hit somebody really hard, it's going to turn into targeting.
It's like the hit on the quarterback from Georgia. The rep that threw that flag did not even remotely see the helmet. He just saw a big hit, and he just immediately threw a flag.
Yeah.
Just
put yourself in favorable positions. No dumb hands to the face penalties. No after the whistle stuff. Like there's been some close calls. You know what I mean? The Jordan Clark thing against Louisville, the Riley Mills thing against USC, the Bo Collins thing against Texas A&M. Like just play clean, smart football, handle your business in between the whistles. That would be the only other one that I have, because there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to come in and disrespect Notre Dame. And you have to be the man to say, you know what? Say what you want. do what you want. I'm handling my business between the whistles, between the white chalk, and on the scoreboard. So that would be my only other one, but that's all encompassing offense, defense, special teams. So that's where I'm at.
Trev, we did have one super chat that I want to get to before we get out of here from Maltavius. Thank you very, very much, my man. And Notre Dame defense was dog tired against USC, man. How do you feel about Landau's performance thus far? We were asked that earlier in the week, Trev.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I need to see how it goes to the season, but I'm not at all surprised that Notre Dame's defense was tired in that USC game. I kind of expected a little bit. And I don't think it's anything indicative of a strength conditioning issue. I saw that with a lot of teams in the last week of the regular season. And part of it was they were on the field a lot in that game, because of, their own issues, right? You got to make some stops, but then also the offense had a couple big plays that allowed them to get on the field. They had played a lot of snaps. They played 77 snaps against USC. That was the most they had played since actually the highest number of the season. Now, some of that was late in mop-up moments, but they played 67 against Army, and those are physical snaps. 68 against Virginia, 69 against Florida State. They played a lot of snaps down the stretch, and with no Howard Cross, with no, you started to see some of the lack of depth at certain positions like corner, D tackle start to kind of wear on guys a little bit. And I think those are big reasons why you saw this defensive line wear down a little bit, why you saw the linebackers wear down a little bit, why you saw some guys maybe not be quite as sharp. I mean, Adon Schuler and Christian Gray both played over 500 snaps this season. And these are guys that last year played. I mean, Christian Gray played 75 snaps last season. In the 4 games before playing the 79 against USC, he played 33, 54, 54, and 57. Like, that's a lot of snaps. He didn't play over 50 snaps in any of the first 5-6 games of the season. You know what I mean? You look at Riley Mills, and he had to play 64 snaps that game. He had played over 40 snaps in 4 of the 5 previous games. I just think, look, that's a lot of snaps. And Adon Schuler, 551 snaps. He played 27 snaps the year before. And some of these guys are also playing on special teams, which is something I think they need to maybe look at next year in November. I understand this desire to have, certain guys be on special teams, but you also got to make sure that you're being smart about it. Adon also played 63 snaps on special teams. So not only did he play, 66 snaps against USC on defense, he also played 9 snaps on special teams. You got to be more willing to sub out some of those guys. Now, this year, it's hard to do. Who's the healthy safety that Luke Tallent is already on special teams, right? I mean, you can't sub the Don out for Luke. Next year, maybe it's a little bit different when you get Jadon Blair here and you have guys like Dallas Golden and, some of the young linebackers that aren't redshirting and things like that. And maybe in the postseason, it's like, hey, look, we can play this guy now because he's redshirt doesn't matter. So we can put Bronte Johnson on some of these coverage units because we're not worried about blowing his redshirt now. Perhaps that's it. Maybe now Carson Hobbs maybe plays in a couple special teams because you're not worried about blowing his red shirt now. So those are all things you can kind of look into and think about that could factor into, what some of these guys get to do in the postseason. But those are just things that I think it was just normal, just worn out from a long season. And then also that team had flown from the middle of the country in Indiana to New York City the week before, came back, had Thanksgiving, went out to LA for an afternoon game. I just think all those things factored in. I don't view it as a Lauren Landau issue. If the team wears out in the postseason, that'll be more of a Lauren Landau issue because you've now had 3 weeks to prepare and get back to being good health. But and they were so fresh against Army. That's the other thing is they were not fresh. They were fast against Army. I just think they put a lot into that. And the other thing too, guys, is they were worn out, but they also just played poorly. And that caused them to have to play more snaps because their own mistakes in that game caused them to play more snaps. Don't make some of those technical assignment mistakes and you're off the field more. Maybe you're not as tired in the second half and you could put that team away.
Sure.
I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it pertains to the super chat, and thank you, Maltavius, for the super chat. I mean, it's for me, how do I feel about him so far? I mean, fine. It's just incomplete. Like I said before, with staying healthy, it's you brought Lauren Landau in to basically help your team from games now to the national championship, not games 1 through 12. So a little incomplete right now, but I mean, so far, fine. I mean, I know injuries have been a problem this year, but some of them have been freak ones. Like, I mean, Ashton Craig got rolled up on. Like, there's nothing a strength.
Jordan Patel hose.
Right.
Boubacar's was just, I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to do about that, right?
Yeah. You know, like the one question mark is like, I still don't know what happened to Ben Morrison. Like,
Still can't. I mean, I don't know if it happened during the game. I don't know, because I look at the game and I'm like, you look fine to me. But sometimes, you know, like adrenaline wears off and you're like, ooh, I have some pain here that I didn't really like. It was a little sore during the game, but now that, you know, like my first career start in college, I injured my ankle in the first half, had to come out, miss a play at the end of a series, and I went back in and I was fine. I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit. First pass I threw that game hit a linebacker right in the chest. But I rallied back, baby, and I threw a 32-yard touchdown pass to Tom Brown with less than a minute left for us to win 31-27. So I just want to point that out. Led us on a 2-minute drive, threw that touchdown pass. Boom. I felt great. Was jumping up. I mean, run off the field. I'm jumping up into my lineman's arms. I'm super excited. I'd sprained my ankle during the game. We had a 4-hour bus ride home. About an hour into that bus ride, my adrenaline wears off, and I have never been in that much pain ever in my life. I was miserable on that bus ride home because I didn't have that adrenaline, which helped me not feel that ankle injury. For all we know, Benjamin did something and he just didn't feel it because there was a lot of adrenaline. But then once you get out there and maybe, who knows? I don't know. But for the most part, it's like the early injuries had me concerned. But what we said at the time is, let's let the season play out. If this continues, then maybe there's a big problem here. But it didn't. They haven't had a lot of new injuries here down the stretch, except for Howard Cross, who got his knee rolled up on. I saw Kingston Williams' injury. Somebody ran right into his knee and pushed his knee back. That's not a strength conditioning issue. It's just one of those things that happens in football.
Right.
But if they wear down in these last 4 games, even with the 3-week bye and minimum 9 days between every game, then you start to say, okay, is this guy really, you know, is his plan built for them to have, you know, championship run? But so incomplete, but so far I'm pleased with what I've seen for the most part so far.
Yeah, totally.
Just got to see him finish.
Absolutely.
Right? So yeah, good. That's a very good question though. Very good question. So Trev, that's it, man. Why don't you go ahead and lead us out of here, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. Another fun show today, guys. I mean, we're still counting down the days. We're about 8 days out now from Notre Dame's really college football's first NCAA home playoff game ever. And it is very, very fitting that it is taking place inside of Notre Dame Stadium, I will say. So you guys know what it is. Tomorrow, Friday, free-for-all mailbag. Bryan and I will be back here at 2 p.m. Don't forget to check out the women's basketball team. They're playing tonight against UConn. I believe UConn's undefeated. It's just kind of that old school Big East matchup from back in the day. So really exciting stuff. But before you get out of here, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family and anybody that you know loves Notre Dame as much as you do. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform that you watch this on. And of course, subscribe to us on the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, 2 p.m., that's Bryan. I'm Trev. We will see you guys back here tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast.